So for both attendees and committee members, we are in fact being taped for video, and I believe we're also being recorded. So just everybody heads up.
That's a what a shame if I'd known that.
Damn, I know. I just got my hair cut. Yeah, sure. I will call on her. I'm not looking for her to actively participate in the meeting. Please make that clear. I will call on her when it is her opportunity to testify. Erin, could you join us and walk us through ER 180822, draft 1.2?
Hi, this is Ms. Smith. Hi, it's Kristen, Natural Resources Special Advisor. I'm calling you at the beginning of the meeting, but
Aaron Adler, Legislative Counsel. I'm here on the draft that the chair just cited, so I won't repeat it. I was asked by the chair to create a draft committee bill for the consideration of this committee on a subject in the Governor's Climate Action Committee report. One of the recommendations, which is to have the Joint Fiscal Office oversee a study with an expert on various approaches to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so as you see, the summary says that the bill proposes to require JFO to conduct a study with independent professional assistance on the costs and benefits to Vermont of various approaches to reducing GHG emissions and submit a report of its findings to the General Assembly. Chair also asked that a duty of the governor be included to use existing avenues to advocate for regional and interstate solutions to greenhouse gas reduction, which I believe is similar. The language is based at the chair's request on a pending House resolution. So, diving a little bit deeper, there are 3 sections to the bill. Section 1 is the study, Section 2 is the duty of the governor, and Section 3 is the effective date. The overall direction in Section 1A is to have the JFO conduct study to analyze fiscal impacts of adopting and implementing various approaches to reducing GHG emissions caused by Vermont's consumption of fuels used in transportation, heating, cooling, and ventilation. And there are a number of things the study is supposed to look at. Subdivision 1, the study shall evaluate costs and benefits for Vermont of a carbon tax approach, including looking at carbon taxes enacted in other jurisdictions, and examples are given in British Columbia and Ireland. These are not necessarily exclusive examples, but they are examples. Subdivision B looks at a cap and trade approach, including an analysis of programs such as the Western Climate Initiative or an expansion of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And subsection C would have the study look at the cost and benefit for Vermont and other regulatory or market-based approaches that may exist. And the report that I was asked to look at asks of the study, not necessarily, as I read it, it's not necessarily limited to carbon tax or cap and trade, but be able to look at other possible approaches. So that's why I think it's so good. I am wondering at some point whether I should say what is the meaning of cap and trade, or what is the meaning of carbon tax, or whatever you think other witnesses are going to get.
Okay.
So
We'll talk about that.
okay, I will just keep going through the bill for right now.
That would be a definition.
Well, or just background on what those things refer to. I don't know. I don't know how much the numbers know, for example, about what a cap and trade program is. And that's, people may have different levels of knowledge about that. But I can summarize it if you need me to. So I will go on. So Subdivision 2. The study is supposed to compare the approaches evaluated under Subdivision 1, including their comparative ability to achieve significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, their impact on economic development, innovation, and job creation in the state, and the effect on the cost of living in Vermont. So this has to take into account a wide range of potential implications that these could have. And the study would consider both interstate and Vermont-only approaches. It would also evaluate Subdivision 4 tax incentives and tax structures that may spur economic development, and also analyze the effects of a regressive carbon tax. One of the issues with a carbon tax is that it's usually a flat fee per unit of fuel consumed, and that has differential impacts on customers with varying incomes. Sub 5 looks at expanding RGGI to include emissions from transportation, heating, cooling, and ventilation. Currently, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative looks at emissions from electric utilities only. The study would evaluate whether revenues may offset the sales income of property tax. So this looks at possibly shifting tax, if you will, a tax shift. You raise it one place, lower it other places. And the study would evaluate methods to provide assistance to mitigate effects on Vermonters low income. So those are the range of issues in the draft. Subsection B would require JFO to retain independent professional assistance to help them with the study, and would authorize up to $100,000. That is, the number does not have any science behind it. The expectation was that it would cost some, at least it would cost some money for an actual expert with the knowledge to do that. So you'd have to look at that number.
Yeah. Get chairs.
In a way, it's a placeholder. Legislative Council would provide JFO with legal assistance. The executive branch would be, JFO would be entitled to assistance and relevant information from the executive branch or any agency thereof. They might have a lot of knowledge that might be relevant, or that maybe that the Climate Action Commission could also help JFO do some of this work, or at least inform it. The report would be due January 15th with findings to this committee, Senate National, and the Ways and Means of Finance Committees, and the Transportation Committees. Section 2 would impose a duty on the governor to, or designee, to use all available fora to advocate for regional or interstate solutions to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, such as a regional carbon tax or cap and trade system. There are examples of those fora given: Coalition Northeastern Governors, the annual conference of New England Governors and Eastern Canadian Engineers, and its regional climate change initiative, and the regional greenhouse gas initiative. And that would take effect on package.
Okay. Questions for Aaron?
On page 2, line 14, interstate, that would mean not just states near us, but between any states.
Correct. For example, the Western Climate Initiative is actually a cap and trade program that includes California, British Columbia, Ontario, and Quebec.
So it could also be inter-country.
I guess that's actually true, but I was just noting that they are not all, I was thinking, yes, they're not all contiguous to each other, but you're right, it could be international.
International,
Yes.
inter-country.
Me and the next
Can you
come
put
up with
inter-
it. It took me a second to
I
come
know,
up with
right,
it.
right. Should we put that in there? Should we put that in? I don't know. Okay. I'm
We
thinking
can
might-
add international.
There were other U.S. states that were participating in the Western Climate Initiative at points, but they're not participating currently. That's my
questions? Yeah.
I've got one on page 3, E, the report that due on January 15th. If this went, if we look at this year, do we have some kind of reassurance that we're not gonna vote on it before we get the report next year? Vote on this bill? If this were put in, if we act on it this year? As the marijuana bill. The governor had a commission that we voted on the bill before anybody saw the report.
Well, we do have an interim report from the commission. Part of the, and that, I believe our first witness will be talking about that. And now I understand yeah. But no, that report is out. The interim report is out. Other questions for Aaron? If you will be able to stay with us for the morning?
It's my plan. It's possible that House Energy may try to pull me out, so.
Lock the door.
They have a,
John, take care of that, would you
they're
please?
trying to get a bill out, there's one provision that they have to figure out if they want to change, so.
Yeah, okay.
It would only be for a short time.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, Paul, if you would join us, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I believe you know the drill, but in case you don't, if you would state your name and any association.
I'm Paul Costello. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Council on Rural Development. I'm the producer of the Vermont Climate Economy Action Team, and I'm the appointed co-chair of the Governor's Climate Action Commission. I'm primarily speaking for the Climate Action Team that we've convened. The Vermont Council on Rural Development is charged as a state rural development council in the federal farm bill. We're the only organization that federal agency heads can be a part of in Vermont. We are an interesting constellation of leadership with the heads of federal agencies, 4 members of the governor's cabinet, Republican or Democratic administrations, we really don't care. Leadership in the nonprofit sector, the heads of each congressional office, business leaders, and local leaders from around the state. We look at the foundations of the rural economy. We encourage communities. We believe local leadership and local community development is the foundation for the progress of the state. And we encourage, we stand on fundamental values that we think are historic to Vermont around democracy, around leadership, local leadership, around listening, and patriotism of place and patriotism for the state in the future. So it's, we have a very unique role in some ways. We're charged to be a unique facilitator of public process. We're the most experienced community organizing entity we believe in Vermont. We've gone to over 100 communities all around the state. We've helped them with everything from expanding broadband to building daycare centers, economic development committees, to business incubators. We follow communities, and we ask that they stand for where they want to go. But our board also looks at the fundamental ways that what we hear at the local level adds up, and we report in public policy. We identify issues like ag development, or the structure of planning in Vermont, or the future of the forest products industry. We convene leadership from those industries and sectors and public policy to think about ways forward. Over the last few years, we've seen a constellation of action in communities where we're creating jobs in the clean energy sector, where every town we look at is built, has been looking at things like ag development and building downtown business incubators and thinking about transportation, public and private, where that's going. And we've come to see that there's a constellation there. And we're always looking at the positive in our communities. We also try to add up positive directions that are a step away from both the lines of bureaucracy and the silos of government, federal, state, and so forth, and across party lines. So we're really not interested in right or left politics, and we try to set directions that we think are useful to the future of the people of Vermont. The climate economy has come to be a central organizing principle for us over the last couple of years because we see a constellation of opportunities. We've run 2 local summits for Vermonters on this as an idea, and we held a national climate economy summit at UVM last year with 500 attendees, including people who had billions of dollars in investment capital to bring, scores of young entrepreneurs from around the country, and business leaders from places like Patagonia, GM, and other major companies across the country. To us, Vermont has a tremendous economic opportunity. Danny Kennedy from the California Clean Energy Fund that invests billions of dollars in the California economy says, we're looking at a transition in the future to a clean energy economy, and we're looking at climate change as a fundamental challenge to economic development on a global scale. But if you think about it, there are people who are inventing solutions. There are creative business people. When you think about how business works, business looks for investment in return. It thinks creatively, how do I solve a problem that's going to produce resources? How do I invest in a way that's going to get return? And you see car dealers, you see General Motors looking at its future in a very transformative way. You see groups like Volvo are going to be completely electric in the future. So you see this transition that's going forward that we've named the climate economy. Danny Kennedy said to us, this is the greatest economic opportunity in world history. And it's not, it doesn't mean there's not going to be fundamental challenges to the future, but those who lead and those who invest and those who develop strategic solutions, like the folks inventing electric airplanes at Burlington Airport, those folks are going to benefit, they're going to lead, they're going to provide market solutions, and they're going to expand their operations and grow over time. So our thought is, when we think of the rural economic development challenge that we face in Vermont, the loss of youth, the fundamental demographic problem, the problem that every small town is wrestling with in terms of how it incubates the next generation of jobs, we should look at how we situate ourselves as a place that attracts, nurtures our own young people, and supports the development of this economy as a foundation for future of affordability, the future of protecting the most vulnerable, the future of having state resources to move forward. All that said, we built a commission of our own, our council, to look at this as an issue that produced this Progress for Vermont report. And it set some high-level objectives and ideas that could be moved forward. We've held these 3 summits, and at the end of this process, my board said we should build a team to carry these ideas forward in public communications and bring them to the governor and legislators. And we produced, so we now produce the Climate Economy Action Team. It's about half business, about half policy folks that are thinking in line with these directions. That group has set up a number of priorities that we've shared with legislators in their inboxes and so forth. But fundamental to those is this question of evaluating market conditions, evaluating tax, evaluating opportunities in cap and trade structures, locally, regionally, and potentially globally. So this bill that you're reviewing is absolutely central to the direction that we think is fundamental. We're not, as a group, in favor of a carbon tax. We're not, as a group, in favor of a particular variety of a cap and trade system. The unfortunate thing that we see in politics and in the process of moving initiatives forward is the fact that as Vermonters, we have a patriotic responsibility to look above the things that divide us. If we come into a small community like Newport, where we were last week, where leadership is fractured, it's fundamentally challenging for people to work together to line up as a collective direction for activity. This is the fundamental problem with politics in a small community, but it's also the issue at the state level. We need to build common points of reference as we look at issues for the fundamental issues that we face for the future, for economic development, for climate change. From our point of view, we have to do this sort of analysis as we have to stand as adults. We have to stand above interests. We have to stand above factions. And we have to say, what's the cost and benefit to the people we serve in evaluating what California is accomplishing, evaluating what British Columbia has done, evaluating the different proposals that have been produced within the state for carbon pricing mechanisms. At this point, what we see from the outside is that issues are raised and people are immediately organized against those issues, rather than we look dispassionately at the economic foundation of potential in those issues. For us, that's essential to us. That's essential to making progress. So the recommendations I've shared with you all electronically, but maybe I could pass these around as well. From the Climate Economy Action Team, describe the benefit of studying pricing and market mechanisms for the future. Encourage that to happen. And I also have printed on the back the language from the Governor's Climate Commission, which was presented on December 29th to the Governor, where that commission, with different language and but fairly similar emphasis, also supports this kind of evaluation for the future. I want to say that, you know, there's a lot of reasons morally or politically to work on this issue of climate change. But in the end, it's an issue that transcends politics, and it's an issue that is that in a global economic system that's transitioning, where the entire world is in a competition, where China is trying to situate itself as the international market leader, where India is looking at technology shifts that are going to accomplish this, in places that have been behind historically. Actually, we have a penalty of a retarding lead in the structures we have for infrastructure in the country.
Say that.
Penalty of the retarding lead. It's something that historians talk about when they look at the stage development of different economies. When we see the international competition that's going on, and California seizing leadership in this country, and other places like Silicon Valley, Austin, Texas, and Cambridge, Massachusetts, the big thing going on in Silicon Valley is partly about the digital economy, but it's also about energy, it's about transportation systems, it's about the intelligence of your home system for energy monitoring and management. This stuff is as big as anything else going on in the economy, and it's still in its seed form. It's going to be an enormous opportunity, and Vermont needs to get its market share. It also is, we're situated with rural communities, with dynamic innovators here now that we need to appreciate. And when we think about our economic development strategy, you work from your assets, you work from your positive brand story, you work for the thing that's going to make you seen as the most dynamic spark place that you can. And in line with that as an economic development strategy, we need to have more rational data on the table and fiscal analysis to take next steps in terms of tax policy and market development. So really appreciate and honored to have the opportunity to speak to this committee. I'm glad of questions, but I know you've got a long day ahead of you, and we're glad to see.
Via will stay with us in case the, for a little bit, thank you. Questions for Paul? Yeah, Tom.
Mr. Costello, that's quite a speech you just gave. I wouldn't be holding up California as any great innovator. Last I knew, they're $3 billion in the red. They have all kinds of environmental problems, social problems. I think that's a bad example. I think a guy like you should be in Davos, Switzerland right now, the way you carry on here. But see, I'm a fossil fuel guy, and I'm not a believer of climate change or any of that stuff. So,
We're not
I like big
debate
oil.
climate change.
I like big oil. Okay. Just want to set the record straight.
Jim and Mary.
I I'm happy to hear another, your definition of patriotism. I think in this, we've been struggling in this country for maybe 20 years on what patriotism, what patriotism is, what face does it have? And I appreciated your use of it in a couple of sentences and sort of what that means.
I understand that this was one of the, was it 4 strong recommendations from the Climate Action Economy to study this?
From the Governor's Commission or from?
Yes, Governor's Commission.
The Governor's Commission report has 5 areas really, and under them are a number of parts. But this was one of the 5 that was endorsed
And
by
I
that
understand,
group.
it did have a strong vote, is that correct?
Yes, it wasn't a completely full consensus, but close.
20 to 1,
20 to 1.
according to the report. I was just looking at this.
Paul, I heard you say as a group, you're not in favor of a carbon tax. Why not?
I think that the commission, the Climate Economy Action Team that we put together has a lot of diversity to it, and a lot of folks with different points of view. I think that they believe that it's important to know more, and that for us to make a decision that works for all Vermonters, one of the things that I think is very strong about the Governor's charge to the Climate Commission that he's put together is the idea that whatever we would be proposing, we would be proposing because we believe it would benefit the Vermont economy and create jobs, which is fundamental to him and to us, I think. Advance affordability and not hurt it, and then protect the most vulnerable Vermonters. So from our point of view, and in both sets of recommendations from the Climate Economy Action Team and from the Governor's Commission, those principles, I think, are inherent. And part of the reason you need to evaluate from a rational centrist position is that it's not an ideological question. We need to look at this in terms of dollars and cents and the benefit to the communities we serve. And I believe that I'm sort of speaking for the Climate Action Team to say that I think that they feel that that's essential. And they also, I think they think it's essential for us to have that kind of research that's nonpartisan before these issues can be looked at as objectively as possible. And so that's why we believe that the study's important at this stage.
So you're more or less in a holding pattern until more research has been completed.
Yeah, I don't know if after research is completed, everyone's going to support any particular direction from this research. And one of the great moments at the Governor's Commission, you'll hear from a young fellow on there. What's his? I can't remember. Harrison. Who in our last session said we should support this. He said, and we shouldn't try to know what's going to come of it. That if we have a deep sense of prediction of what the study's going to find, and it's sort of like Einstein shows that the tool you use affects the result that you find, right? So we think that it's essential to be objective and not to be in favor of one or another variety of a pricing system or one or another model of market development, and really do the rational analysis based on Vermont scale and who Vermont is, not California. What would work here to advance the Governor's goals and the goals of this legislature? And right now that conversation isn't happening in a rational centrist way because there's no common ground of information to start with. So,
Good, thank you.
thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity.
We have Annette Smith on the phone. Annette, are you still there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. If you would state your name for the record and your association and If you have a brief opening statement, that would be great, and then questions.
Thank you. My name is Annette Smith. I am Executive Director of Vermonters for a Clean Environment, a grassroots citizen organization. Thank you for inviting me to testify today on the Climate Action Commission's recommendation to conduct carbon pricing study. In my comments today, I will present 4 points of information about carbon pricing, Vermont's carbon emissions, the regional electric grid, and the challenges of creating incentives for behavioral changes given the current technologies. I was asked to co-chair the Climate Action Commission's Technical Advisory Group. However, my co-chair, Kevin Jones of Vermont Law School, and I had no role to play in the Climate Action Commission. As the co-chair of the Climate Action Commission, Agency of Natural Resources Deputy Secretary Peter Walk directed anyone who was interested in being on the Technical Advisory Group to contact him. As a result, the Technical Advisory Group is populated with people, some of whose expertise is unknown to me. As co-chairs of the Technical Advisory Group, our sole role is to respond to requests from the Climate Action Commission for information if needed. We received no requests for technical assistance from the Climate Action Commission. Had I been asked to provide technical information about carbon pricing, I would have asked the Climate Action Commission to consider the perspective put forward in this document, which is linked in the handout that you have, titled Carbon Pricing, a Critical Perspective for Community Resistance, produced by the Indigenous Environmental Network and Climate Justice Alliance. Until I read the report, I would have been recommending that Vermont explore participating in a regional carbon pricing program. However, this report has given me pause. The perspective presented in the report should serve as a backstop to any consideration of putting a price on carbon in Vermont, as they articulate facts that show that carbon pricing is a false solution to climate change that does not keep fossil fuels in the ground. Carbon taxes do not cut pollution to the degree needed and are a greenwash. Carbon trading and offsets help corporations and governments keep extracting and burning fossil fuels. The revenues generated can never compensate for the destruction wrought by the extraction and pollution that is the source of that revenue, and carbon pricing schemes result in injustices, racism, and colonialism that are intentional in scope. The carbon pricing report goes into detail to support the above points. VCE has worked with members of the Indigenous Environmental Network on water issues, and we have great respect for their work. I hope this committee will read their report as you consider proposals for instituting a carbon tax in Vermont or as part of a regional initiative. Many proponents of putting a price on carbon point to British Columbia's experience. In 2016, Food and Water Watch issued a report titled The British Columbia Carbon Tax, a failed experiment in market-based solutions to climate change. It too is worth reading as you consider adopting a similar policy. I'd like to take this opportunity to offer a few other comments on the idea of putting a price on carbon in Vermont. This is not a simple topic. The following graph from U.S. Energy Information Administration shows that Vermont produces the lowest carbon dioxide emissions of any state, and this is for total energy, not just electricity. Per capita graphs show essentially the same thing. Vermont's Forests and Parks documents estimate that the majority of these emissions are offset by our forests. While Vermont likes to be seen as a leader, it is prudent to question whether this particular issue is one where Vermont should lead, and if the decision is yes, then the question is, at what cost? My personal experience helps to illuminate the challenges. I have lived off-grid with solar panels, batteries, and fossil fuel generators, either propane or gasoline, for 30 years. Because I have a direct connection to my electricity production, I know the watts of all my appliances. I turn almost everything off at night, and living with renewable energy has helped me understand how renewable energy systems work. The premise of carbon pricing is to create incentives for people to change behavior. I have done everything I can to reduce my carbon footprint, and I have hit a wall called propane. Until more efficient alternatives to propane refrigerators and kitchen stoves are developed, I have no choice. A carbon tax on fossil fuels will cost me more money and will not cause me to switch to an alternative because there are currently no good alternatives to the propane upon which my household relies. This recent article titled Inventors Search for Missing Link in Renewable Energy by Energy and Environment News highlights the problem that liquid fuels are an unmet need and the challenge of transitioning to renewable energy, and there's a link to that article. The Ethics Plan provides a good example of the complicated challenge for modern space in the transition to 90% renewable by 2050. It proposes to reduce the cost of electricity for Vermonters. Well, not me, I'm off-grid. The idea is that people will use the savings to invest in air source heat pumps and electric vehicles. Whether that assumption is accurate is unknown. However, the concept of instituting a policy to encourage people to change behavior is a noble one. Several years ago, I came across an academic study that I wish I had saved, and I have been unable to find it. It found that building out all the renewables possible would result in more consumption and would not cause the behavioral changes desired. But let's assume the assumption of the Essex plan is correct. Will the widespread adoption of electric air source heat pumps, for instance, result in reducing Vermont's fossil fuel consumption? Since most people are tied to the grid, we need to consider the resources in the regional grid, which assumes that in the coming decades, more power will be generated by renewables. I provide two recent examples, one from the very cold period we just had, and one from a more moderate day, both around 6 to 7 p.m. There is no sunshine, but even if there was, most of the solar panels in New England are blanketed in snow much of the time during the winter. One is for January 7th, price is high, temperatures are very cold, fossil fuels generated 65% of generation, the system demand is about 20,000 megawatts, and you'll notice that there's 35% oil in that grid mix. January 17th, the price is high, the temperature is moderate, fossil fuels are about 56% of generation, system demand is about 18,000 megawatts. Both examples show that after dark, and even when there is wind in the mix, the majority of the grid generation fuel mix is fossil fuel. In a very cold spell, the region is about 30% oil, which is rare but necessary due to pipeline constraints that limit the amount of natural gas available to the region. In summer months, it is typical to see about 60% natural gas in the regional fuel mix. Vermonters who net meter solar feel they are making a contribution to renewable energy. However, after dark, solar makes zero contribution. In winter months, sometimes the wind blows, sometimes it does not. The regional grid must have sufficient capacity to meet system demand regardless of the policy desires of individual states. Like it or not, air source heat pumps are mostly fueled by fossil fuels during winter nights. Will this reduce Vermonters' emissions? Perhaps, but it appears to be a very complex calculation to determine the net costs and benefits given the current technologies. ISM New England recently released this fuel security report, which says, fuel security risk, the possibility that power plants won't have or be able to get the fuel they need to run, particularly in winter, is the foremost challenge to a reliable power grid in New England. The identified solutions involve importation of more natural gas and electricity from outside the region. If I've given you a headache, good. Spent a lot of time thinking about how renewable energy systems work and how to create incentives to change behavior to reduce consumption of fossil fuels. Having that direct connection, as I do with an off-grid system, has resulted in my household using much less energy than most average Vermont households. I clean the snow off my solar panels. I wait until the solar hot water is heated before showering to avoid using propane. Net metering solar does not have the same effect. In practice, people choose to maximize their solar production in summer months, build up credits, and then do not clean the snow off their solar panels in winter because they have excess credits and don't see the need for the power. I appreciate the opportunity to share these thoughts with you, and I wish you luck as you grapple with whether or not it is in Vermonters' best interest at this time to introduce carbon pricing. We all agree that it is the planet's best interest to reduce fossil fuel consumption as rapidly as possible. The question is whether carbon pricing for Vermonters is an effective means of achieving this goal. I would be glad to answer questions.
Questions? Everybody's taking aspirin here tonight. The topic that is in front of us specifically today is whether or not we should invest in determining the effectiveness and the options of market-driven policies or actions in order to affect the carbon footprint of the state of Vermont or the region.
Yes, I understand that, and that's why I feel it's unfortunate that I didn't have the opportunity to introduce the Indigenous Environmental Networks report, which is a 60-page report, for consideration before we got to this point. The overall question is it even going to be effective, is addressed in this report, and I think it's a very important perspective to consider. Putting a lot of money into it as a state right now, having read this report, I really question whether it's the right thing to do.
Thank you. That answers my question, what you thought about this, the approach in the legislation. Okay, other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Annette. would you like to stay online to listen, or?
No, that's okay, but I do appreciate it. It was very helpful to hear the introduction. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, Annette, Jim McCullough, I need a distinction. I get from your presentation that at this time you have real reservations about the direction of green taxation, if you will, or greenhouse gas emissions, and taxation to try to change those. The distinction I'm looking for is, I think I get it, that part, but where are you on the idea of this legislation of commissioning this study by JFO?
Well, I understand that it's a recommendation of the Climate Action Commission, and I do think that it could lead, if the study is done properly, it may lead to the recommendation that it not be instituted in Vermont. It's my informed opinion at this point that carbon pricing is a gimmick that is not going to be effective in achieving the goal. If a study needs to be conducted to come to that conclusion, then what's the cost of the study, and is it a good way to spend Vermonters' money?
So likely, I'm thinking based on your remarks and testimony, you have not had an opportunity to look at the draft 1.2 dated 1/23, because it's more than about just that.
Well, I did listen to Aaron Adler's run-through.
Okay.
I understand that it's more than just that. But if the overall goal is to determine whether or not to put a price on carbon in Vermont, then I, certainly, from your perspective, I'd want to know what the cost of that study is.
Thank you, Annette.
Well,
All right. Thank you, Annette.
okay, thank you.
Talk to you later. Bye. Joanna.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to testify.
If you would.
Chairman, yes, I will introduce myself. I'm Johanna Miller. I'm the Energy Program Director at the Vermont. Well, thank you for the opportunity to testify.
If you would.
Chairman, yes, I will introduce myself. I'm Johanna Miller. I'm the Energy Program Director at the Vermont Natural Resources Council. Appreciate the opportunity to weigh in on your exploration of supporting a potential study of carbon pricing and decarbonization mechanisms. So just to give you a little background about me and the Vermont Natural Resources Council, you're probably well aware, but I just want to get everyone on the same page. Vermont Natural Resources Council is a statewide environmental education and advocacy organization based here in Montpelier with members across the state. We have 4 programs: a water program, a forest program, a sustainable communities program, and an energy and climate program. And it's the energy and climate work that I lead, although it is all inextricably connected. So I also have the privilege of serving as the coordinator of the Vermont Energy and Climate Action Network, which is the network of over 100 all-volunteer grassroots energy committees across the state. Many of you represent communities that have these solutions-oriented grassroots groups doing really important work at the local level, implementing project by project through the policies that you have helped to put forward, all kinds of different weatherization initiatives, transportation initiatives, solar on schools, buildings, etc. They're doing a lot of really important work, because I spend a lot of time working with communities across the state. And their goals and their priorities inform our policy making. So while I'm not representing them, I just want to share that the community context and the goals of communities across the state certainly informs my work and our work. So I have not had the opportunity until I heard Aaron walk through the bill to actually look at it. So I'm going to speak more broadly to our interest in supporting a fair, full, and funded analysis of various strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and actually seize the economic development opportunity that a proactive, intentional policy could actually help the state of Vermont achieve. I would also say, and I'm going to speak to it a little later, that I am one of the members of the 21-member Climate Action Commission that the governor has convened. As you've heard, the Climate Action Commission voted overwhelmingly in support of examining this issue to get the information that we need to make informed decisions. So that's just a little bit about me, and I would also say that I think this is a really important conversation to be having here in the state of Vermont. It's happening regionally, you're not alone, I'll speak to that a little bit more later as well, but clearly there is little action happening on this important conversation at the federal level, so the opportunity and the obligation actually rests with the states. So I'm going to send around just an overview. So if you don't mind, I'll leave one here. I'm sorry. There you go. So in my testimony, I'm just gonna, if you don't mind sort of following along with me, I'm gonna walk through just a few things. PowerPoints are definitely not my strong point, so please, thank you for working with me on this. So starting first, walking through this presentation, I just wanted to help set the context, which I'm sure you are well aware of, but so we can respectfully disagree, but I think the science around climate is real. Overwhelmingly, the world's leading climate scientists have recognized that our world is warming and that it's having significant economic and environmental consequences, including, I read just recently that the catastrophic storms that we had in 2017 cost the United States about $300 billion. So the world is warming. The catastrophic storms are connected to climate change. They are having significant economic costs, and we actually have an opportunity to do something here about it. So our winters are warming. We can, and despite the frigid cold temperatures recently, our winters are warming and our climate is changing. Last month, actually, Anchorage, Alaska was warmer than Jacksonville, Florida. So our climate is changing. Things are changing. If you want to flip to the second page, and that's changing here in the state of Vermont too. In November last year, there was an analysis that found that the warming from climate change is hitting Vermont particularly harder than any other places in the nation, with Burlington, Vermont being the fastest warming city in the nation, with average winter temperatures having risen 7 degrees in the last 47 years. So our climate is changing, the world is warming, and it's having consequences here in our lovely little state. So turning to the next page. So this warming, again, having environmental and economic costs and consequences, and the state of Vermont has actually committed to addressing this issue and establishing some pretty, I would say, necessarily ambitious greenhouse gas emission reduction goals that are commensurate with the challenge. And on this third page, as you'll see, they are goals that we have established that we are far from meeting. So the dotted line represents our statutory goal, a goal embraced by the legislature as well as Governor Phil Scott. You can see here our actuals related to our greenhouse gas emissions, and then the trend line. So the long and the short of it, despite the fact that we have overwhelmingly bipartisan political consensus and certainly public support for doing something about climate and seizing the economic opportunity, we are falling far short. So we actually need policies that bend that curve. And thankfully, I would say that there is opportunity in addressing that challenge. So thanks in part, you can turn the page to you. enacting strong and supportive policies. Vermont has done a lot in the electric sector in particular, creating jobs and opportunities for a lot of Vermonters. Vermont's clean energy job sector is one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing in the state. It is now employing 1 out of every 16 Vermonters who are largely doing a really important efficiency work. They're weatherizing homes, they're installing heat pumps, they're getting, they're getting solar installed. In fact, the clean energy employment sector grew 29% from 2013 to 2017. So a recognition of this body as well as Vermont's forward-looking utilities is that we are moving off of fossil fuels and there's economic opportunity in doing that. So you have done a lot of work in the electric sector. There's a lot to celebrate there. But unfortunately, we're falling far short in the heating and transportation sectors, which are heavily reliant on fossil fuels. So the heating and transportation sectors also happen to be our 2 largest greenhouse gas emission sectors. So there's certainly a need in addressing those sectors, putting more people to work, and moving Vermonters smartly, affordably, but as swiftly as possible off of fossil fuels as a solution to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and our fossil fuel consumption. So you're probably well aware that we don't, frack for gas or drill for oil or mine for coal here in the state of Vermont. So that means we import 100% of the fossil fuels that we use, which means that 8 out of 10 of those dollars, about $2 billion annually, leaves our state to go into the pockets of fossil fuel industries in the nation or internationally. So we are losing a tremendous amount of money by the fact that we import so many fossil fuels. So there is an opportunity to keep more of those dollars in state, which have those dollars circulating through our economy, and carbon pricing or market-based mechanisms are one potential approach to changing that dynamic, transitioning to more clean energy solutions locally and even regionally in the New England / greater Quebec region, but keeping more of those dollars in Vermont and in the region. So, turning to the next page. Sorry. Let's see. Yes, thank you. All right. So, and I just want to underscore again the economic opportunity, but also to say, as we explore different strategies to, help Vermonters affordably and equitably, ensuring that we protect the most vulnerable and help them participate in the clean energy transition, which they want to do, that we figure out how various approaches could work for them, which is why fundamentally an examination, a broad, fair, but full examination of decarbonization strategies is imperative. And on the next slide, I just show you that we would not be alone in examining this policy. This is an image that shows carbon pricing policies that have been instituted across the world. Over 50 jurisdictions and nations have implemented, about 50 jurisdictions and nations have implemented carbon pricing approaches, and it's working well for them in those places, doing what it's intended to do, which is reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It also is working well to support and strengthen their economies. They have a commitment to reducing energy consumption. They've implemented policies that are uniquely situated for them. I haven't examined every single one of those nearly 50 policies, but my analysis of several of them and understanding is that every single one of those policies has been crafted to uniquely fit their local context. So clearly here in the state of Vermont, where we are heavily reliant on fossil fuels, again, for heating and transportation in particular, if we move forward with some strategy, it would be a strategy that would and could be uniquely situated to serve the state of Vermont well as all Vermonters. I would say that I've worked with a lot of low-income earners and low-income advocates on a lot of different projects. They clearly are the most vulnerable to the sort of idiosyncrasies of international fossil fuel reliant economy. They pay far more of their income for their energy needs, including transportation. There's tremendous opportunity in helping them live more affordably, reduce their reliance on fossil fuels, and sort of move them off of that treadmill, which is, so there's great opportunity in that. I just wanted to also say, and respectfully disagree with the previous witness. Obviously, you can get your hands on lots of different reports and analysis. I was looking at the British Columbia government website this morning. British Columbia has instituted a carbon tax since 2008. It was advanced under a conservative administration. They're also a rural, wintry place. Lovely, I hear. I've never been there. But according to their website, in that time that they have had this policy instituted, despite significant population growth, their greenhouse gas emissions have been reduced. Again, the intended goal of the policy. Simultaneously, their GDP has risen significantly. So not only is it doing what it was intended to do in terms of reducing carbon pollution, but also doing well for their economy. So again, as I noted, you see here, carbon pricing is something that's happening around the world. There is also a pretty vigorous conversation in New England and across the nation as other states are exploring and advancing strategies, carbon pricing in particular, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and grow the economy. In particular, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, it's my understanding, all of these states are exploring carbon pricing, and I hope doing what you guys are considering doing now, getting the facts and the information at your fingertips to figure out how and if you could structure a policy that would work well for the state of Vermont. I imagine they're doing that in those places. I strongly believe it's something we have an obligation and opportunity to do here. So turning the page. So this is just to say that there is broad recognition that we need to do far more on climate, bending the curve on our rising carbon pollution, and sort of crafting the intentional and supportive policies that will help do that. I think carbon pricing or some well-crafted market-based mechanism like you're talking about in a potential study could potentially help us do that. In fact, the state's own total energy study, which examined how the state might implement the comprehensive energy plan, again, broadly bipartisan supported goal, looked at carbon pricing in particular, and it showed that, yes, we could actually institute a Vermont-based carbon price or decarbonization strategy that would bend the curve on rising greenhouse gas emissions, as well as do it affordably and equitably and economically beneficial. So I would say that, there are many, I think it's just time to explore this policy. It's been talked about a lot. There have been several bills that have been introduced in this legislative body that have proposed various approaches to do that. I think the time is right for again a full and fair, and I would say funded, which I appreciate in the bill that you're examining, suggests that, about $100,000 to do such a study, led by the Joint Fiscal Office, which is also important. And just to underscore what you've already heard, but the Climate Action Commission, again, I am one of the members of that commission, voted overwhelmingly to support such an examination, such a broad examination, a 20-to-1 vote, and with the goal of, tasking the JFO to contract with or consult with an independent entity that could actually examine this broadly and look at the very important questions that we need to ask an answer, which is how could you structure a policy to address and mitigate against any negative impacts of the fact that we are a rural state, that we have vulnerable Vermonters that we want to make sure that we are protecting as we start this transition, and not only protecting but bringing along in this transition, knowing that Vermonters want to participate in the clean energy evolution, something that is, that is happening and will be happening as we move off of fossil fuels for a variety of reasons. So the Climate Action Commission recommended this analysis. As you heard from Paul Costello, the Climate Economy Action Team also recommended such an analysis, and you may or may not have heard this week, but the Vermont Mayor's Coalition, when they outlined their 2018 legislative priorities, they also recommended studying the electric rate reduction plan, the Essex plan in particular, as one way to potentially, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but they recommended an examination as a way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and move Vermonters off of fossil fuels as a way to spur our economy. So those are three entities that are recommending that you do what this bill, is focused on, which is to fund and advance and get the facts on the table to make an informed analysis, and potentially examine what kind of policy this body should or could pursue. So I would just say from our perspective, BNRC's perspective, we are fully supportive of this bill. I think it's a fundamental step to ensuring that we actually have the information we need to inform this conversation and put to bed and test the assumptions. I've heard some things today that I would respectfully disagree with, and I think we need to get the facts. And this proposal, that this study is aimed at getting the facts and making sure that we have the information we need to figure out how we keep more of those 100% imported fossil fuel dollars in the state of Vermont circulating through our economy and in the pockets of Vermonters, and putting people to work in the clean energy transition, building and accelerating that really exciting job sector. So again, my hope that you move this bill forward, and I look forward to working with you all and others to make sure that happens.
Good, thank you. Yes, Mayor.
Just one question. I mean, it's very encouraging to see the growth in the renewable energy sector, and I know that we talk a lot about, trying to get good paying jobs in Vermont and keeping the youth here. Has there been a study done that kind of shows the average salary of a renewable energy job compared to the average salary of Vermonters, and also the average age in them?
That is a really good question. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to it. I certainly can look into it. The Clean Energy Development Fund, the Department of Public Service does, and I actually have a handout and I will share it with you. It does the study of the Clean Energy Jobs Report. That very well may be in there. So let me look into that and I can get it back to you. And I will, before I leave, share with you just the executive summary of the Clean Energy Jobs Report from 2017, which reflects those stats of the 1 out of every 16 Vermonters being employed in the clean energy sector, which I would submit to you was, that didn't happen by accident. We had a lot of people employed in that sector because of strong supportive policies, political leadership, and public support and interest in moving towards clean energy. So that was what I think you're exploring here and now. How do we actually continue to support and accelerate that transition? And I would just say it needs to be supported through intentional and commensurate policies that actually make it happen. So this examination would be critical to that.
I was wondering, of the people employed, the jobs that are being done, what percentage is publicly funded and what is non-public?
Publicly funded. Oh, I don't know. I mean, a lot of the jobs the highest percentage of the jobs, as I understand it, is in the efficiency sector, which I would imagine that's Efficiency Vermont and the contractors that they work with and our community action agencies. So in terms of what you mean by publicly funded, clearly Efficiency Vermont is in part ratepayer funded. Our community action agencies are publicly funded. Again, I can look into the Clean Energy Jobs Report and see if there's any information related to that. I can tell you right now, and again, for full transparency, my husband works in the clean energy sector. He is a native Vermont Springfield boy who has worked for Sun Common since they started, a UVM grad and a Vermont Technical College grad who is now doing what he wants to do, making a living and staying in the state that he loves, and I'm glad because I like him. Doing this kind of work, and we work with a lot of young people, clearly young people are very interested in participating in this sector. I don't know the answer to your question, and I will look into it.
Thank you. I have another question, and it's also for you, Paul. Is when I look at the charge to the JFO to conduct the study, is there anything you think is not included or any concerns with what is in it? And specifically, when I look at page 3, it says the study shall evaluate the methods to provide assistance to mitigate effects on Vermonters with low income. Is there any other thing that we should be talking about, like maybe equity and who's paying, or equity and who gets the incentives regardless of where they live geographically in the state, things like that? Or is that too pointed a question at this point?
I haven't had an opportunity to look at the language thoroughly, but clearly there's a strong concern about regressiveness, and if you look at the cost-benefit analysis of different models, are there industries or groups that would be hurt, and how would you look to mitigate that in a policy that's effective? The other thing that I think that the Commission was also interested in, and I'm not sure whether it's in your language, is the way the Commission framed it was, are there regulatory ways also that could be used to reduce carbon emissions? And the Climate Economy Action Team didn't really have that as part of its thinking, and I don't think, I don't know whether that fits exactly with this model, but the language of the of the Governor's Commission has that inherent in it, and you might want to look at that language and see if that has connection with the direction of the committee.
Aaron?
On page 2, lines 7 through 8, that's intended to capture that possibility of looking at other regulatory or market-based approaches. So that ability is in this language. That doesn't mean the language can't be changed, but I think that was scooped up.
Mr. Chair, I would also say, Representative Bodie, that I have not had the chance to look at this language, but I think that another approach would be potentially specifying a few key constituencies that to be consulted in this. We've been working on exploring this type of policy for a long time and have worked very closely again with the Karen Lafayette, the Vermont Low Income Advocacy Council, and the community action agencies. So from my perspective, it is essential that any policy responds to, respects, and mitigates the negative impact to the most vulnerable. I believe fundamentally it is possible. Study after study and economic analysis have demonstrated that that is so. It is my hope that this study moves forward and also ensures that it asks the right questions and gets those answered so that we can make that happen, and maybe consulting with, specifically having some of those partners at the table or collaborating with JFO would be, or JFO's contracting entity could be one way to do
that. We still have 3 witnesses between us and lunch, just for information.
I was just going to ask about the clean energy job sector. It says 1 out of 16 Vermonters work in the efficiency and renewable. I'm just wondering, is that gonna continue? Is that something that we see in the future? And the clean energy employment grew by 29%. You know, all I'm asking is, right now, if we had 100 jobs in the clean energy, but next year, are we gonna need that many? What's gonna happen long-term as far as energy, as far as jobs are concerned in the United States or in Vermont? I mean, it takes 100 people to put up the solar energy panels, but next year, we're not gonna need those 100 people. We're only gonna need 3 people to look at them. So I'm just kind of questioning, how long does the clean energy continue? How do we continue maintaining all those jobs?
Well, I mean, I would just point us back to the chart about our greenhouse gas emissions. So again, recognizing that we've done a huge amount in the electric sector, but very little in the heating and transportation sector. So moving people off of fossil fuels also means moving them a little bit more to sort of clean, strategic electrification, which is what our innovative utilities are already doing and need to be doing more. So I don't think, I look at this and my answer to you is, this says to me that the work is not nearly done, that there's far more opportunity. I mean, just for example, don't quote me on the exact numbers, but in the governor's budget address the other day when he recommended putting $300,000 into a wood stove change-out program, which I commend, again, responding to a little bit of the Climate Action Commission's recommendations. One of the recommendations of the Comprehensive Energy Plan is to get 11,000, I believe, advanced wood heating systems installed. We are so radically far short of that goal that I just use that as an example to say there's much, much more work to do. There's interest among people in doing it. There's clearly a need when you're talking about climate. And I think there's economic opportunity for everyone in the state of Vermont to keep more of those dollars in state, putting people to work in those good paying jobs. And I'm going to find out how good paying they are for you, Representative Sullivan.
Good.
Thank you. I really
Thank you,
appreciate it, and I
Joanne.
really appreciate your thoughtful consideration of this important bill.
Ben?
For the record, Ben Edgerly Walsh with the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, more commonly known as VPIRG. Thank you for taking the time this morning to hear from, well, everyone, and myself in particular, since I'm the one in the chair today for right now. I wanted to start just by briefly apologizing. Actually, I had intended to submit a written testimony. I'm going to be throwing some facts and figures at you, and wanted to provide those citations in writing, along with some recommendations for the resources you could look at as you're considering this legislation. My son, who's 2.5, was sick all week. Thankfully, I am not, I assure you, but I had to go home, so I was not able to do that. So I'll be submitting that as a follow-up next week. VPIRG, as you probably know, is Vermont's largest environmental and consumer protection advocacy organization. We have north of 40,000 members and supporters in, I believe, every, and if not every, nearly so, inhabited city, town, Grand Gore in the state of Vermont. I'm going to deviate a little bit in a moment from my prepared remarks just to comment on a couple of the studies that were brought up earlier, that are studies I have reviewed. But I wanted to start by just saying, as I suspect everyone in this room knows, VPIRG is an organization that is supportive of carbon pricing, of incorporating the price of the damage that fossil fuels are causing in the price of those fossil fuels. And that we're not just supportive of that concept generally or at the national or regional level, but that we actually have taken a position of supporting carbon pricing here in Vermont. I wanted to bring that up because I want to be very clear that that is not a position that we came to lightly. When back in 2013, we started looking at Vermont's, but continued to look at Vermont's carbon pollution numbers, the trajectory that we were on from a clean energy or carbon pollution standpoint. And it was becoming clearer and clearer that we simply were not on track. You've heard from others today and other days about how true that is. And so when we started looking around for what are the big potentially transformational policies we could engage in as a state to actually get us on track to meet our statutory greenhouse gas goals, carbon pricing certainly rose to the top. It's policy, and again, I'm not talking about Vermont here specifically, but writ large, nationally or internationally, is supported across the spectrum. Economists right, left, center think that this is one of the key ways to tackle climate change, that incorporating the cost of that damage that is being done to the climate and the living things that depend on a stable climate into the price of fossil fuels will essentially unleash the free market to figure out the best ways, most economically efficient ways to address those concerns and reduce that pollution. And so, you know, we were looking at folks like Henry Paulson, who's the Treasury Secretary under George W. Bush, or George Shultz and James Baker, who were economists, and Baker was the Chief of Staff and Treasury Secretary under Reagan. You know, folks like that coming out in support of a policy like this. And so then the question for us was, okay, but is it right for Vermont? And so before we said anything about this being a direction that the state should go publicly, we commissioned an analysis by Regional Economic Models, Inc., or REMI, as they're more commonly known. I'm sure you've heard of them or familiar with their work. They created the economic model that ACCD and the Department of Public Service and JFO uses when they're analyzing whether or not a policy is going to be good for Vermont from a job standpoint, from an economic standpoint. And so in looking at this, we decided essentially to go to the horse's mouth and commission them, their economists, to use their own model, to run their own model on carbon pricing in Vermont. And what that analysis found was that depending on the particulars of the policy, you'd see job growth of somewhere between 1 and 3,000 jobs, and an annual GDP that's somewhere between $50 and $150 million above, annually above business as usual. And that gave us the confidence that this is actually a policy that we should be, you know, coming into this building and recommending. About a year after that, as Johanna mentioned, the Department of Public Service did what they coined the Total Energy Study. That did a lot of energy modeling and looked at a number of different policies. And one of the things they did was actually have their staff also run that economic model. And what they found actually was even better than what REMI itself found. Their analysis found a net increase of 2,200 to 6,400 jobs and a GDP increase of 70 to about $200 million.
Excuse me, is this the study of November 2014?
Yes, that's the one that DPER, BBSR, and DEIC
So
commissioned.
if anybody would like to look at it, I do have a copy.
And it's also still on the Energy Independent website. So let me briefly take a step back, and actually I just mentioned 2 studies that were done in Vermont about Vermont policy options. I do want to address 2 other studies that were brought up earlier today, the Indigenous Environmental Network and Food and Water Watch studies that Ms. Smith brought up. So I've looked at both of those. The Indigenous Environmental Network, I would just say, I think in particular that one is certainly worth your consideration and worth you looking at as you consider how to direct, if and how to direct JFO to study this kind of a policy. As she pointed out, it's about a 60-page report, and about 2 of those pages are on direct carbon pricing as opposed to cap and trade. It's primarily a report about cap and trade. And I think it brings up a lot of really good points. There are better and worse ways to do any policy, and carbon pricing or cap and trade is no different. That's one of the reasons that DPER signed on to a coalition regionally as RGGI was being tinkered with, redesigned recently. That was spearheaded in part by another organization, Toxics Action Center, that strongly encouraged RGGI to consider the concerns of the most impacted communities more strongly going forward. So the primary critique that they bring up about direct carbon pricing, carbon pollution taxation, is that it's often painted as a silver bullet. And that, I want to be very clear, is not how we see it. I think if you look at the reports that have been done about Vermont, it isn't a silver bullet. It is, I would argue, the most important policy we could engage in, but it is not a singular solution. You don't just do this and then walk away from the problem. And so I think it's a valuable report, but when it comes to carbon pricing, misses the mark to some degree. As far as the Food and Water Watch report on British Columbia, I'm actually a dues-paying member of Food and Water Watch. I respect their work enormously. I have friends who work there. I have read that report, and there, from my perspective, are two significant flaws in it. One, it doesn't look at per capita numbers, and British Columbia's population has grown by, I think, about 400,000 since that policy was put in place, and clearly that comes with it. And that's mostly immigration into British Columbia from other provinces. That obviously comes with it additional carbon that is being emitted in British Columbia as opposed to other places. So they ignored that. They also ignored the first year of the policy's implementation, which you have to look at the entire life of the policy. You can't just cut off the first 6 months. So I respect their work enormously, but I think they missed the mark on that. But I would actually say, I think the fact that you're hearing competing views from different studies is exactly why it makes sense to have JFO, your own independent, nonpartisan policy analyst, set of analysts that work for you, look at this and figure out whether or not it's the right direction for Vermont. I can sit here and tell you that I stand behind the work that Remy did for us, that it was impartial, that their economists did the modeling and I didn't have any, I wasn't tinkering with it. But I understand how, the role of organizations like ours that either can do research or commission research, and then the role of organizations like JFO or the Congressional Budget Office. They work for you, and their full-time job is helping you figure out the best policy paths for the state of Vermont. And so I'm also here to support this legislation. I hadn't seen it before this morning, so I don't have any specific recommendations. I would say that there are a couple of places I'd point you that have looked at carbon pricing design, including at the state level. The Brookings Institution has done several comprehensive reports on how carbon pricing can be designed, different policy options. And then World Resources Institute has also taken a look at that sort of thing. So I can get you some specific reports of theirs in my written follow-up testimony. I'd also say I'm happy to provide recommendations from BPROOP's perspective. I think Representative Odie, your thought about distributional analysis, I think that's somewhat baked into the language that I've, since I've skimmed it this morning. But taking a really hard look at the distributional impacts, and by which I mean, low, moderate, upper income Vermonters, who's paying and what, who's getting what kind of rebates or other benefits back. That's exactly the kind of question that needs to be asked if we're going to be getting this policy right. And as an organization, BPROOP is very interested in getting it right, not just getting it done. So that's what I have. I'm conscious of time, but if the chair is interested, I'm happy to take questions.
Questions? Look forward to written testimony and getting it into the record and some of those links. And since this whole thing says you guys are going to do something
It's a
for
nice
us,
big target on your back. So.
Yeah, no, I figured we ought to talk to you.
So I did type up some written notes and I sent them to your committee assistant. I think they're available on your iPads. I don't know if she printed them for you. I have a couple of copies.
I can send it to you. You want me to print them?
So I'm going to channel my best Steve Klein impression for you this morning, which you should enjoy. So I will be a little grumpy and negative at first, but I'll be a little more positive after.
Yeah, and you're not talking anywhere near fast enough.
Okay. Oh yeah, it's right before lunch.
No. I mean, if
Oh.
you're doing the steam channeling,
Gotcha.
you gotta be talking really fast.
So JFO is generally not in favor of being tasked with conducting the study. It's probably isn't a huge surprise. And the reasons being, JFO tends to focus its work on more short-term and near-term budget costs and tax implications, and looking at sort of these big global policies that have huge both indirect and indirect implications just isn't sort of our bailiwick. So even if we have an outside entity coming in and ultimately doing the study, we still have to sort of oversee that, and it puts a strain on our staffing and capabilities. Next, while we understand that the intent of the bill would be for us to hire a consultant, there would be a lot of work that would need to be done, as I just hinted at, including drafting an RFP, reviewing submittals, working with the consultant to map out sort of objectives and a timeline, reviewing drafts of the study and reporting ultimately to the General Assembly. Our staffing is limited, and we're already, looking at this summer, we're already going to be busy still figuring out the implications of the federal tax reform for the state of Vermont, in addition to any changes that are made at the state level to respond to that federal tax reform, and any other sort of priorities that the legislature sets for us between now and May or June, which could vary. And then, just specifically on energy fiscal policy, we as an office, we're limited in that area. I know Ledge Council has, Aaron Adler, who has a great deal of knowledge, but within our office, we're limited to, me and maybe one other person, and I'm definitely not as knowledgeable as Mr. Adler.
Wait, I cannot conduct a study like this.
Well, yeah, I'm not trying to push it off on him. Just saying that,
my notes.
looking at the universe of legislative staff, it's JFO, Ledge Council. Ledge Council has someone to draft those types of bills for you. JFO, we can do the work of understanding policy, fiscal implications, but our knowledge base is relatively limited. And so, for us, if we were to do the study, we would also have to probably bring in outside help to review the work of the consultant, so a second consultant to look at the work of the first consultant. And it's just because we don't have the knowledge base to, look at the data drivers and understand them. We can achieve a limited understanding, but I think, this is the bill would, because it's so broad, it just opens it up to a huge universe of different policies and different regulations to achieve greenhouse gas emissions. Now, moving on to a more positive outlook, if you did ultimately want us to conduct or be responsible for making sure the study is completed, I did lay out a few sort of suggestions for how the bill could potentially be changed to work a little, achieve the ends that you're looking to achieve. We received a cost estimate from a group, I think out of DC last year, that gave a price of about $185,000 for performing a similar study. And I think Joyce Manchester might have spoken to the committee to some extent on what they were interested in doing or what they were potentially going to do. But they've done some higher level studies. They're interested in getting into state level studies on this topic. So they stated that they were giving us a relatively favorable price. So, looking at another firm could potentially be more, and I think we would ultimately put it out to bid and find the best firm that can do the job. So I think, just for the study, we would want, an appropriation of $185,000 to $200,000, and then probably another 25 to 30,000 to bring somebody like Tom Cabat, Deb Brightman, to look at their work with us so that we can ensure that we're getting the best possible product. So, in total it would be 215 to 230,000, and that could be even low because I found that when Oregon did a similar study, they passed legislation requiring it to be done by their JFO equivalent, and this was specifically for an air quality tax or fee, so it was more limited in scope, and that organization was appropriated $200,000 just for that piece of what this bill would be. And then in Washington, Washington State, excuse me, the bill that commissioned this study there that was more general didn't have a direct appropriation, but did have a fiscal note that estimated the cost to be $377,000. So it's it's a bigger state, more people, more sort of moving pieces, but it's a significant potential cost to do the study. I think going back to some recommendations we have, the language should indicate a source of funding for the study. I know it says make 100,000 available or authorized 100,000, but it doesn't have an appropriation or an indication of where the money would be coming from for it. So that would probably happen in the Appropriations Committee, but it's just something to put out there. And then finally, the language currently leaves the scope of the study very broad, and I'm sure you have your reasons for doing that because there are a lot of ideas out there. But I think having such a broad scope adds significantly to the expense of doing a study. I cited section 1A, 1C as being especially problematic because there are countless numbers of regulations and market-based approaches that could be put in place. And if you looked at studies that were done by Oregon, Washington, Massachusetts, California, you could probably, if a smaller group were to meet and sort of discuss this, they could probably narrow the scope of the study just based on what's been looked at in other states and sort of what might work and what might not work. And that way, we sort of focus, we help narrow the focus of whoever would be doing this work for us and, maybe get us a better product. And in this sheet, I listed a bunch of links for studies. I'm sure you've probably heard about most of these, but the one that was done by Oregon in 2013, that was limited to just sort of a carbon tax or air quality tax fee. Washington State was more general. Massachusetts did one at the request of the administration. I tried to look into what the cost was to Massachusetts, but I haven't found that number yet, so I'll continue looking and sort of see what it is. The U.S. Treasury Department has highlighted carbon tax methodologies. I think that was released in January of last year. There's been work by Brookings, as the person before me indicated, and then the REMI study of Vermont. So there's a lot of information out there, and while ultimately you might decide that we need to do sort of this broader study, first we would like to not be charged with doing the study, but second, if we are, it would be great if the committee could consider some of the things that I just highlighted. That's all I have to say.
Dan, when is a study not a study? But so this question would be, how might your office, instead of doing another study, like the Oregon study, the Washington study, what have you, study the studies, pirate stuff from there, and come up with reasonable adaptations for Vermont, and that's not really a study, that's research. And what might we get out of something like that, And would that be significantly less impactful to your time in office and budget?
I think potentially it could be, and there are a few avenues for doing that. If you wanted our office to do it, we could look into it. We could also, one thing that when Steve and I were discussing this yesterday, one thing that sort of cropped up is, if there was a working group of legislators that was also charged with sort of, getting through these studies and coming to the same conclusions, but having elected people sort of frame then what a future more comprehensive study would look at could also be an appropriate means. But I think ultimately what we would do is read through these state level studies and find trends and say, all right, well, in regards to a carbon tax, this is where states have sort of generally, they ventured into this sort of area of feasibility. In regards to other policies and regulations, this is sort of, some of the conclusions they've come to. That's not to say that these are things that would be appropriate for Vermont, but it would at least narrow the universe of what, if we were going to pay $100,000 to $200,000 for a comprehensive study, it would sort of narrow down the scope and make it more feasible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
For the record, Dan Barlow, Public Policy Manager with Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility. This morning, one of our members, Brand Klepner from Danforth Pewter, was supposed to be here. We had, for the record, Dan Barlow, Public Policy Manager with Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility. This morning, one of our members, Brand Klepner from Danforth Pewter, was supposed to be here. He had a death in the family yesterday, so I apologize. Not as prepared as I usually would like to be for this distinguished committee. And recognizing that everyone also wants to have lunch, I'll try to be as brief as possible. VBSR, we are a statewide business organization. We were founded in 1991. We have more than 700 members today. Just in the past year, had 100 new members join the organization. Our members are dedicated to what we call the triple bottom line approach to business. It's people, planet, and prosperity. Our businesses often find that when they take care of their workforce and they are good stewards of the environment, that feeds into their bottom line and makes them a more successful business. So VBSR actually has a long history of talking about carbon pricing and carbon taxation with our members, with the business community, and with the legislature as well. We were co-sponsors of several studies in the late 1990s and also the 2000s that talked about the benefits of putting taxes on things you want less of in your economy in order to reduce taxes on things you want more of in your economy. But to get to the point, I want to talk about two things, and that is, number one is why businesses are talking about carbon pricing and climate change. And I think it's because, one, there's a concern, and two, there is an opportunity. Number one, the concern, we have iconic Vermont industries that are threatened by climate change. Maple syrup, the dairy industry, our winter recreation economy, all these are at threat from climate change. Our brand as a state of being a green state, of being one that is known for its forward progression on climate change, is threatened by our continued reliance on fossil fuels. In addition, we've seen extreme weather events impact Vermont. Tropical Storm Irene a few years ago cost $733 million in damages here in Vermont, $14.3 billion in the United States. And these storms are becoming more common and more frequent. And that brings me to the opportunity that the business community sees in addressing climate change, and particularly using carbon pricing as one of the tools to get us to a low-carbon, fossil fuel-free future. First of all, Vermont spends $2 billion a year on fossil fuels. Those fossil fuels are not coming from Vermont, and we are exporting about 90% of that money right out of state. So businesses see an opportunity to do what we do with energy, to do with energy what we did with our local food sector a few years ago. And this legislature had the wisdom to pass the Farm to Plate, and Vermont over the past few years has seen a more localized food network. More and more Vermonters buying their food from local farms, local farmers markets, and we've seen the economic development and the boom of new companies starting because of that, of recognizing that investment and making those links. Additionally, carbon pricing as a market mechanism will allow the business community to lead the way on reducing fossil fuels and being more innovative in business techniques. You know, this drives innovation for businesses, and they will find new ways to use fewer fossil fuels and to be more energy efficient and to harness the technologies that are emerging today that will allow them to move away from fossil fuels. As other witnesses have said, you know, the clean energy economy is growing in Vermont. About 17,000 jobs. We've seen significant growth over the past few years in that sector, and we want to maintain that momentum. Additionally, more than 500 businesses have signed on to the Energy Independent Vermont's pledge in support of a state-based carbon price. Those are, you know, not just kind of the typical lefty businesses that some, look at, but these are you know, some big businesses in Vermont, some iconic businesses. You know, look at something like Danforth Pewter. You know, they make little pewter necklaces, and over in Middlebury, kind of an iconic business, not the typical one you'd think we'd be talking about the impact of climate change on their business model. One business leader I talked to about this issue is Mark Curran, the co-founder of Black River Produce down in Springfield. For folks that don't know about the company, they employ about 200 people. They pick up produce from 500 farms each day. They distribute food to 2,500 customers across New England. They buy 1,200 gallons of diesel fuel each day, and the company supports putting a price on carbon pollution. Mark Curran, the co-founder of the company, said, "We expect our growers to farm their land in a sustainable manner. Even though it may not be immediately cost effective, they should expect the same from us." So, additionally, absence of a state or national carbon pricing mechanism, businesses have stepped up and started doing their own internal carbon pricing to both address fossil fuel use, climate change, and to prepare for the future that they know is coming, where there will be a government mandated price on carbon pollution. Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream, back in December 2015, implemented a $10 metric ton on carbon emissions internally. And this is a company, you know, that clearly, you know, runs, they're looking at the whole life cycle of their product, literally, you know, from the farm to the refrigeration for them. And so they've been working with their farmers to reduce emissions, and you know, have had success, you know, using this mechanism internally to be more energy efficient and reduce their fossil fuel use. Additionally, 7th Generation, they created an internal pollution fee of $12 per ton in November 2015, and they actually used that revenue to help their employees weatherize and do energy efficiency work at their houses. And that ended up becoming a really popular program with their employees. And finally, All Earth Renewables, and this is a really interesting program that I like a lot. They launched a green benefits program. So basically, they give their employees an annual allowance of $6,000 for fossil fuel commuting to and from work. And then they calculate what their employees end up actually spending on commuting to and from work. And there was kind of a competition among employees to see who could, you know, use the fewest fossil fuels, who could be more energy efficient. People started carpooling, finding other opportunities to get to and from work. And at the end of the year, whatever they don't spend is a direct payment to that employee. And the average employee working for All Earth Renewables was netting $2,000 a year from this program in their wages. And I think, you know, absence of you know, carbon pricing on a state level or a national level or a regional level, you're going to see more and more companies doing this internally. And I think it's going to trickle down from these kind of large businesses like 7th Generation and Ben & Jerry's to the more medium-sized companies. And I've already been talking to the BBSR businesses about ways that folks can implement similar programs internally. I should note that very essential for BBSR in any carbon pricing plan is taking into account our rural nature as a state, and also low-income Vermonters. That's probably the number one question I get from members when I talk about this issue. They say, what about rural Vermonters? What about low-income Vermonters? So that's why we appreciate that the Essex Plan, which was kind of the brainchild of a few of our members last summer, working with low-income advocates, especially put priority on returning as much of that money as possible to folks living in rural parts of the state and folks who are low income. Any plan that progresses needs to address those two issues, and in fact we believe needs to put those populations ahead of where they are right now, as opposed to leaving them behind. And so that's my testimony. I'd be happy to talk about this issue more. Again, the reason the business community is talking about this is not only because it threatens their bottom line right now, but they see an economic opportunity for Vermont in addressing climate change.
I'm not sure how you could get anything more into a presentation in that time period, no matter how well prepared you were, Dan. Thank you. That was a lot of information.
I think I'm probably as hungry as the rest of the members of the committee.
Questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, we're back here at 1 o'clock. We are. You want?
Well, we need to share. Oh, it was in sharing oxygen. And there's not a lot left.
Thank you. For the record, I'm Peter Walk, the Deputy Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources. I also serve, along with Paul, as co-chair of the Vermont Climate Action Commission, appointed by the Governor through Executive Order 1217, to develop a series of recommendations in line with our charge, which was...
While senators wrangle over House will avoid a shutdown in 3 weeks, House members are considering...
Excuse me.
members that could expose what they say is egregious FBI surveillance practices.
I think Wilson Ring is pranking you after his budget incident.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I have no idea what I gave. I do want to provide copies of the letter the governor has provided in response to the commission's recommendations. As many people do, I wear multiple hats. In this instance, I'm here on behalf of the administration. We provided through the Climate Commission, provided the governor with a series of roughly 17 recommendations. When you count through the 5 and all of the subparts thereof, the governor is really interested in moving forward and having further developing most of those recommendations. In this instance, he is not supportive of moving forward with this study. He believes that as it's clear in this letter, as the administration supports, that he's appreciative of the commission's work to get this to be beyond a discussion on a Vermont energy carbon tax. But he doesn't support a Vermont or regional study. He believes these issues need to be considered at a national level, so Vermont is not at a competitive disadvantage economically. And that he has asked the commission to prioritize the recommendations that he thinks are ready to move forward with and can provide immediate and measurable benefit to Vermonters as we move forward to reach our climate change goals.
Yes, ma'am.
So he doesn't know what, he doesn't feel that it would be economically advantageous to Vermont. How does he know that if we haven't studied it?
Doesn't believe that it will bear out, that it would be an advantage to Vermont to take these approaches either at the state only or regional level.
So he prefers not to really find out what the answer is.
He prefers not to spend, as you heard, a lot of state resources to answer a question that we believe fundamentally we know if there was more support behind it, we'd have that be working towards action, not trying to better understand.
This is basically a rhetorical question.
What does the governor think the odds are that there's going to be a federal approach to a carbon market mechanism for reducing discharges into the air?
Well, accepting the rhetorical nature of the question, I would like to provide that despite the lack of leadership on this issue at the federal level, it is still a national issue that needs to be addressed, and we can't simply wish away the change in administration and hope for different leadership on this issue.
Follow-up question, since given the reality of the national scene, we really are at our own, we're on the hook ourselves if we're going to get anything done. There's a section 2 that's part of the bill, which is to have the governor use his participation in the New England Governors Association, New England Governors Eastern Provinces Association, RGGI, and any other regional forums to initiate discussions about mechanisms, that we can all agree to. And what is either your feeling or the governor's feeling? I have no idea what the governor's thinking.
Well, I will say that nobody from the administration has seen the language before today, so I'm the only person who's seen it. I believe, based on the letter that you're seeing here, that the governor is supportive of trying to find a national solution to this issue, and so to advocate for it at the regional level would run afoul of that position.
Other questions, comments? All right, thank you, Peter. Joseph. There you go.
Hi. Good to see you again, Chair Lee. It's been a number of years.
Yeah.
I'm also pleased to see that none of the heads on the wall are former witnesses to the committee. Happy to be here.
No, we have a separate room.
We have a separate room. For the record, my name is Joe Fusco. I serve as a Vice President of Casella Waste Systems. I'm also on the Governor's Commission on Climate Action. And for the past year or so, I've served as the chair of the Climate Economy Action Team, which is a group convened by the Vermont Council on Rural Development.
Right, we heard from Paul.
So I really, probably not much I can add other than from Paul. So I'll be very brief. Other than to say that this issue is one of, as we've heard, so many different political positions and feelings and emotions, and we feel that a study would be best constructed if it were able to take the politics and the partisanship out of studying the issue. I think when you make any policy, certainly you want to study and learn as much as you can about what the consequences of that policy might be, whether they be unintended or intended. You might even also want to know what you might not want to do, and that takes study in order to do. So we're very, in that capacity as a Climate Economy Action Team, feeling very strongly that the issue is worth studying. It is an issue that potentially can transform the way we live in Vermont. It can transform our economy, and to do so likely would be in the state. You need to understand the wider system in which any actions you would take, and those actions not only being disincentives, but also incentives. I think we have an opportunity here not only to study what we can do with carbon, but also in ways to structure our tax policy and our incentive policy to make other fuels and other actions and other behaviors even more affordable than perhaps even the use of carbon. But it is part of a larger system, and the consequences will ripple and waterfall very far in whatever is decided to do around that, and it's worth, and I can't repeat it enough, even though I may, it is worth further study. But I would recommend and caution that that study needs to be very deep, very broad, and very comprehensive across all aspects of Vermont life that it may affect.
Questions? Paul and then Jim.
Are you comfortable with the timeline?
Ma'am.
Am I comfortable with the timeline?
Yes.
Yes.
So that
I'd probably be more comfortable if it were a little longer.
Yeah.
But
Okay,
again, if it's structured correctly and the resources that are necessary are put towards it, I think it's a reasonable timeline.
So, I'm betting your organization burns tons of diesel. And your endorsement of this study, in light of that, with the knowledge that we don't know where the study will lead us, but it could lead to some carbon taxing. Yet, you're still endorsing it, and I'm putting you on in that sentence of patriotism that Paul talked about. Thank you very much.
Was there a question in there?
No.
Good.
Yeah, rhetorical.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments?
How big is the energy use in your fleet? I mean,
It's significant, but we're also, we like to think we're a good business, and a good business tries to see the future and understands that the world is changing around that business, and it must make certain adaptations. And one of the things we see is a future where most of the propulsion in our society is alternative fuel. We've done a couple things, I'll just speak anecdotally off the top of my head, in the last 8 or so years where we've cut our diesel emissions by 15%, where we've made significant investments in both electric diesel hybrids and also natural gas propelled vehicles. So it's a great opportunity for us. We also know that at the same time that it has environmental impacts, it also has economic impacts, because the less we spend on fuel, the more profitable a company we become. So we see a great economic opportunity there. We would love incentives, let me be blunt, incentives to use different types of fuel in the way that we move our vehicles. We would embrace alternative fuels, certainly, and we'd love to see opportunities for us to become a more efficient business, because you've made it less expensive to use carbon.
you know,
Not
it goes
just
back to
more.
one of your earlier points, you know, make other choices and actions better to pull people away from carbon.
My personal theory is that you could make it a lot more affordable in Vermont to make certain kinds of fuel, for example, less expensive. And I don't have proof of that. I would say let's study that and see that if the effect would be to make, to create a blossoming of certain kinds of economic opportunity, even businesses around being the kind of place that uses different fuels, moves people and goods differently, heats our homes differently, heats our businesses differently, builds our buildings differently. So creating incentives there also not only represents an environmental opportunity to reduce the amount of carbon we use, but also an economic opportunity to spur business growth in bringing those technologies and deploying those technologies here in Vermont.
Other questions, comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
Make your time available.
And I'll come back anytime you need more information.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bob Engling? Oh.
Hi, Bob, this is Christy at the Wildlife Committee. Hi, are you ready for testimony? Yeah. You want us to give you 10 minutes and call you after the next person? Yes, they've already gone. Okay. All right, they're gonna put you on speakerphone.
Hello, Robert.
Hi.
You can hear us?
Afternoon.
Yep, and we can hear you. Let me see, if you would, for the record, introduce yourself and any association, and then if you have a brief statement to make to us, we would like to hear it.
Sure. First of all, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Yes, my name is Bob Amelang, and I'm retired, and I used to work 26 years for CVPS, and for a short period after the merger, I worked for GMP.
Right.
And I was an electric power engineer. Since retirement, I have done some limited private consulting for the town of New Haven, associated with proposed solar generation projects there and a proposed electric transmission line that would be terminating in New Haven that was designed for renewable energy imports. And also, this is not in my testimony, but I'm on the board of directors of NeighborWorks in Western Vermont, and I chair their energy and rehab committee, which is responsible for the heat squad. So I work, and I think a lot of you are familiar with what the heat squad does in Vermont. Yep. So those are my credentials and my associations. And I want to know how much time I would have to testify.
5, 8, 10 minutes.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to have to highlight the main points then, because I know I can't read my whole
Okay, and
testimony.
you've submitted your testimony to Christie, right?
That is correct.
Okay, and we will post it on our website, so it'll be seen there also.
Okay, so you don't have the testimony I submitted in front of you?
No.
Okay. All right. So I've got relatively short time, and I'll highlight the main points. I also want to mention that I'm a member of the Climate Action Commission Technical Advisory Committee.
Oh, right.
But I have not been asked to perform any work for that committee. The only thing I've been asked at this point was to testify at today's committee meeting regarding the carbon pricing study. So I want to make that clear.
Okay.
At the same time, I want to make clear, though, that I think I really do need to testify about the electric power aspects of carbon pricing, because I think there is some flawed reasoning that has gone into the justification for carbon pricing in Vermont. I don't think there's been adequate dissemination of certain key facts. In fact, certain things have been misconstrued, particularly about the value of renewable energy to supply the new electric heating sources, heat pumps and electric cars. I think I've uncovered some flawed reasoning, and I'm going to try to highlight that. It's kind of difficult. Some of the points are very complex. But my recommendation in general, in summary, is I don't think Vermont should be doing any carbon pricing at this point. Perhaps later we can do that. We can maybe follow the lead of some other states, but Vermont is just too small. This is a very complicated endeavor. And I think it will have some very disastrous, unintended consequences if it was followed through with. The other thing I want to just stress, I know that Annette Smith has already put this in her testimony, and I've got it.
She talked with us this morning.
Yes, yeah, she talked this morning, and
Chris, you can roll up.
I have some data in my testimony document as well that shows that basically Vermont is already a very clean state with respect to carbon. We have the lowest amount of carbon emissions to generate electricity, at least in the latest data I can find in 2015. We have a rate of 12. I won't give the details in terms of the limit, but it has to do with how much carbon dioxide is emitted per unit of energy for Vermont.
Yeah, we're actually, we're looking at your testimony now.
Okay,
We have it
thank
up
you.
on our display board.
Thank you. And if these values would be, if you want to refer to the text, it would be in page 2 at the very top. First full big paragraph there. We have a rate of 12 versus Texas that has a rate of almost 1,200 carbon dioxide pounds per megawatt hour. So it's a 100-to-1 ratio. Massachusetts has a rate of 920. So we're already quite clean. And the next table shows that when you look at all of the energy in Vermont and the carbon emissions associated with that, we're about at the top of the list, or that is the lowest emission. So it just doesn't make sense. We're such a small state, and we shouldn't be doing this. But I want to get right into the where I think I can add the most to this process is based upon my experience with power supply studies. I worked a lot with those studies involving how generators operate in the New England power grid and how much fuel is used, how much emissions are made by those generators. And I've worked also with ISO New England people. They're experts in certain technical committees over the years. So I think I've got a pretty good background in how that works.
Okay.
This is quite detailed and esoteric, and there's not a lot of people who understand this, so I want to make sure I get this forward. If you refer to page testimony here, where I make 4 points, this would be page 3.
So we need to move it, Kristen.
And this would be about the middle of the page.
That's it. Yep.
Okay, and where I talk about, and I wrote this, I'm trying to find, okay, the paragraph that would be the third paragraph begins with the assumption that renewables provide much of our electricity.
We got it.
Okay, good, thanks. There's 4 phenomena, I call it there. And first one is that there's an assumption that if we do carbon pricing and we encourage more heat pumps in electric cars, and from now on, for simplicity, I'll just say heat pumps rather than electric cars, but we convert to heat pumps, and the expectation is that the added energy needed to fuel those generators for those heat pumps is going to come from Vermont, because Vermont has such a low rate, a 12, as I mentioned before, versus other states that are up to 100 times higher. That's wrong. That's just wrong, because the situation is electricity in Vermont and the rest of New England comes from a regional operation of the grid for New England, all of New England. It's done by a group called ISO New England, Independent System Operator. They run the show, the grid, and they don't just look at Vermont sources, they look at the entire New England source mix. So I want to make that clear, and I've seen that logic in when I've gone online for some of the sites that are proposing carbon pricing and the benefits of switching to heat pumps. That's just flawed logic. The clean Vermont mix is not going to provide the energy for these heat pumps. Number 2, even if you accept that fact of New England and you understand that, the New England wide is how we operate our system, you can't even look at the average historical energy source mix for New England. New England also is relatively clean. There's a fair amount of Hydro-Quebec energy and other renewable sources in New England, but those are going to remain fixed over time. So that if you increase the electrical usage because all of a sudden you have a lot of heat pumps that have been installed, that incremental energy, as we use the term incremental energy, is going to come from units on an incremental basis. They're going to be coming from fossil fuel units because those are the units that can increase their output. For example, the imports from Hydro-Quebec are fixed. And I also worked with, I managed the Hydro-Quebec contracts at CVPS. The amount that Vermont would buy from Hydro-Quebec was fixed. And the same goes for the rest of New England. So that if all of a sudden our load increased by 10%, give a number, we couldn't automatically get 10% more energy from Hydro-Quebec. We'd have to go out to the open market and buy it, and that would be predominantly from natural gas fueled generators. Okay. Now the third point I say there's a mismatch in time periods during which electricity is used for heat pumps and renewable energy is generated for those heat pumps. And that mismatch in time reduces the carbon benefits. So was there a question there?
No, I'm sorry, you were moving your testimony.
Okay.
And I'm communicating with our staff person.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so ignore me.
Okay, all right, that's fine. So I'll expand a little bit more, and I provided some detailed data in my written testimony, which is quite involved. And it goes like this, again, to summarize it. A very large amount of renewable energy that we expect to grow is from solar energy. We already have a lot of solar in Vermont as well, and New England. But that energy from solar in the wintertime is at its lowest amount. We all know from common sense that daylight period is shorter in the wintertime. There's cloudiness. I also give some data that's very recent from a Rutland, specific Rutland solar installation where there was so much snow cover over a 45-day period recently and that's just ending a couple days ago. That 17 out of those 45 days, there was absolutely no, or practically no solar generation for those days. And yet we had some of the coldest periods of weather in a long time. So you have shorter days and more snow cover from one of your predominant renewable energy sources that is supposed to supply heat pumps. And I think that fact has not been adequately studied. All right, and then, in fact, another thing I'd like to say about this is what I found from my other experience in testifying in the State House is that there are a lot of people from the renewable energy industry who provide information to decision makers in your building. But those people all are promoting their product, and there are very few people like me who understand how this works from a utility perspective that are providing testimony. So you folks are hearing predominantly from those who are promoting this renewable energy and shift to carbon-free electric uses like heat pumps and doing a carbon pricing study as part of that. You're not hearing from people like me say, well, there are problems with that. And personally, I do believe in renewable energy, and I believe that climate change is a global problem, but we have to understand what we're doing here, and we're getting lopsided information. Okay, the fourth point I want to point out is there are technical problems with installing renewable energy, and I can give you, and I've given my testimony 2 examples in Vermont. And the problem is that there are limits to how much you can either install or operate these renewable energy projects. Probably the most extreme case is in northern Vermont, and there's a link in my testimony. And by the way, I'd like to point out to Christy, we need to post a specific link for that study because I think the links don't work online. But there's a recent workshop that was done that looked at the problems of the 2 large wind projects in northern Vermont, the Kingdom Community Wind and the Sheffield Wind Project. Those are both in a northern Vermont region that is defined by ISO New England as the Sheffield Highgate Export Interface. And I know that's a mouthful, but basically this is a specific region, sub-region that the New England operator, power system operator, has defined as a problem area where there's too much generation. The problem is the generation is both wind and solar. It's predominantly wind, and there's some hydro there as well. And it's also governed by some Hydro-Quebec imports over the Highgate transmission tie. That's probably that is the largest one coming in. But the problem there is we have all this renewable energy coming in. We have Hydro-Quebec coming in over the Highgate transmission tie. We have those 2 big wind plants, the solar. And there's just too much generation so that about 20% of the time, the 2 wind plants are told to curtail, which means basically they have to reduce their output. So energy is wasted. I give an example of 60 megawatts. 60 megawatt hours, it could be generated in an hour at the Lowell wind turbine plant, the Kingdom Community Wind Plant. And they're told to generate less, cut it down by a third or a quarter or whatever. And this happens a lot of the time, 20% of the time. And it's, according to the GMP expert, in the several $1 million. And he said to the state, it's costing $5 to $10 million, I think, in that range.
Yeah, Bob, we're aware of that situation. If I could direct you back to the legislation in front of us,
yeah,
which is a question of whether we should invest in a study of market mechanisms and regulatory mechanisms to reduce carbon use here in Vermont. And if I could get you on the record for that, we're also, pushing into other testimony.
Sure. Are you referring to H394?
Yeah, you can use that as a guide for what we're talking about.
I have a 3-page document here I'm looking at. Yes, I would recommend that nothing be done with that. My feeling is at this point in time, there are too many other more pressing issues that Vermont should attend to, that it is not worth our time as a state, as your time as legislators, just to follow this. I would not recommend doing anything. There is a recommendation of spending $100,000 I see here for a study. Mm-hmm. If anything, I would take, if you're going to spend $100,000, study the some of the implications were raised in that northern Vermont curtailment issue. Look at the cost of interconnecting the large amounts of solar in Vermont. There are major issues there. We don't have enough information to go forward.
Okay.
So I would say that we should understand some of these costs and benefits too. I would also point out that I learned from the Vermont Fuel Oilers Group, Fuel Oil Dealers Association. In fact, there's also a link in my testimony to that. That just found this out. Burlington Electric decided to decrease the amount of incentives they are giving to heat pumps because they found that Efficiency Vermont was almost doubling the benefits that could be justified. They were overstating the benefits and savings of heat pumps by 2 to 1 almost.
I understand that, and I could be wrong, I'm not sure, that the reason for that was that it was in Vermont natural gas territory, so the benefits were different from places that were not part of Vermont gas.
Okay, fair enough. That I recognize that natural gas can have a lower cost, but I know that natural gas does have quite high delivery costs to pay for the pipeline, and their costs are a factor.
Okay, so Bob, we're going to sort of end it here. So if you have any last thoughts on the bill that you're looking at, we would be glad to hear it.
No last thoughts, because I think I've stated already that any carbon pricing endeavor is going to be very complicated to set up and administer. And then it would be problematic, for numerous groups dealing with it, including the public. And I think that any step in that direction at this point would be very unwise.
All right.
I would recommend it. And so I recommend against that. I appreciate your opportunity you've given me to speak on this. And if there's no other questions, I will end my testimony.
All right, thanks, Bob.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Rick?
Yeah. Christie, can we connect my computer? You've got the testimony.
Do you want me to put it on there? I can put it on there.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
I'm sure there's a connection down there that'll work. I mean, there's one of everything. But
There's a lot of things.
Yeah, there's a lot of everything, I know. Rather than trying to,
yeah, no, that's fine. But yeah, I have the same problem. They're limited. It doesn't work on UPS. I'm almost out of business.
yeah.
So, if you would, for the record, your name and the association and a brief statement, we would love to hear it.
Okay, I'm Rick Walker-Nuggle. Currently a member of the Sierra Club, working in the Energy Committee and leading a campaign in Burlington called Ready for 100. Give you a little bit of background. I was a farm management specialist with the Extension Service. How I crossed paths with David. And started out as a biologist, and when I retired, decided that climate was an area that I would really like to put some time and energy into, and so I've been doing that for about 3 years. So, and I would appreciate your indulgence. This is the first time I've done any testifying, so I'll give it my best shot.
Okay.
I am fully in support of studying carbon pricing. And I would go about 3 or 4 steps beyond that and say that I think we really should be developing a permanent capacity to do due diligence on all proposed climate interventions, and to go beyond that into coordinating, monitoring, and reporting on the implementation of those programs. This is complicated stuff, transforming our energy system, and we need a big team of people who are working to try to make it all happen in a good order. I would say that accelerating the adoption of low-carbon alternatives is the primary purpose of pricing carbon and most of these other programs aimed at mitigating climate change. Those can most cost effectively, or that can most cost effectively be done by a suite of programs that are complementary with each other. Reconciling the differences between the private and social costs of carbon could be really helpful in that. It would enhance these other programs and vice versa. My approach is really influenced by my experience with people like David and bankers trying to figure out, or trying to get loans. And one of the things that I saw was bankers would be looking at both the operational and financial plans and evaluating them. And they'd be looking for a plan that has a positive cash flow, even with conservative estimates of income and liberal estimates of expenses. So I think we need the same sort of due diligence applied to all of these climate interventions, whether they're carbon pricing, education, financial assistance, regulation, art, research, and development to reduce the costs of the interventions and the technologies that we're using, and so on. So I will focus a little bit on carbon pricing for a while. I think we are in an environment of fear and suspicion about carbon pricing, and given that a poorly planned or poorly executed plan could be disastrous. It would set back the cause of reconciling the private and the social costs of carbon, and it would and set back our transition to a low carbon society. And a duly diligent plan would give us an opportunity, a duly diligent examination would give us an opportunity to improve the plan, which is really what farmers faced after they talked to the banker. They may have not really appreciated the scrutiny at the time, but they ended up with better plans, and in the long run, they benefited from that scrutiny. To do that, we need a group of people with a broad range of technical expertise to evaluate the assumptions and project results. And they're going to need to be able to do things like estimate the impact of switching from fossil to renewable energy, taking into account the greater efficiency of electric motors and heat pumps compared to internal combustion engines and furnaces. I did that, and I got the results that are in the table up there, and they're pretty straightforward, but getting to those results is a lot more complicated than what you can see up there. I see 5 impacts of carbon pricing that we need to be able to manage. We're going to need to be able to, having a carbon price in place is going to give people some experience with it, and we need to be managing that experience to build support. There will be impacts on economic growth that we want to manage. The carbon price could influence the cost of the transition, particularly if some of the money is invested in developing lower cost techniques and practices, or just in finding them and bringing them to Vermont. There'll be impacts on distribution of income and on distribution of the costs of the transition to a low-carbon society, and it can have an impact on the length of time that the transition takes. For carbon pricing to succeed, we'll need to manage all of these. Spending money on one of them, will reduce the amount of money that would be available for another, but reducing the cost of a transition to low carbon society would be something that would benefit people. So, you know, there would be some positive impacts of moving money around. I have a laundry list of specific things that I would like to be learning from this study, and I'm not going to go over that laundry list. But I do have some general categories of information that I would like to be getting out of this kind of a study. Yeah. First is what Vermonters would value, or how Vermonters value these potential impacts. Second is how different designs of carbon pricing could impact the various impacts of the carbon price. Third would be what other conditions would influence the impacts? How can different programs complement each other? I'd like to know how large the projected impacts are and who bears costs and reaps the benefits. I'm going to look at just one specific that I have a little bit of experience with, and that's how Vermonters value the carbon tax or the impacts of the carbon tax or a carbon price. And I did that at the election of 2014 at my polling station. I conducted a survey in which I asked the people voting if they would allocate the revenue, how they would like to see the revenue from a carbon tax, in that case, allocated among some different uses. And you know, these are the uses that I offered to them. And you can see that, you know, there's some big chunks given to improving public transportation and infrastructure, to weatherization, and to developing and disseminating lower cost, low carbon alternatives.
There's a word I got to ask you about. At my unrepresentative polling place. Why pick that word?
Well, it's one ward in Burlington.
Oh, so meaning it's not representative of total cross section, just
right.
That ward. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Thank
so
you.
Which
yeah.
ward is that?
I thought you were commenting on elections in general.
Oh no no. No, it's Ward 6 in Burlington is called the Hill Section. It's west and downhill from UVM, from the UVM campus. It's a moderately affluent, pretty well-educated region, smattering of some probably middle to low-income people, and closer to the lake.
To downtown.
Yeah, closer to downtown, but yeah, largely well-educated and pretty affluent group of people. And also, this was 3 years ago, which was before carbon taxes were so widely thought of or discussed. And I'm sure that that plays some influence on this. Couple points about my results that may be a little bit more representative. Nobody put all the money in one use. Everybody divided it among at least 2 different uses. And when I asked at the end of the survey, if a carbon price was set up with the allocation that you had given to us, would you support it? And 97% of the people said yes. So, just to summarize, transforming our energy system is going to be complicated. It's a big task. There are big benefits and there are big upfront costs, all of which we need to manage. We have limited resources and limited time. So, yeah, I think we should be trying to use all of those as effectively as we can and doing some due diligence on the kinds of projects and programs and policies that are proposed would be useful. And I think it's also really important to create a permanent capacity to monitor to coordinate those programs and policies, to monitor their implementation and to report on them so that we can figure out what to do next. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Questions, comments, other than about the district? All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Linda?
Hi.
Hi. If you would, for the record, state your name and any association. If you have a brief opening statement, we'd love to hear it, and Q&A afterwards.
All right. So my name is Linda McGinnis, and I am a member of the Governor's Climate Action Commission. I am very happy to be here today to provide testimony on something I think is incredibly timely and important for Vermont, for our economy, and for Vermonters. To give a bit of background on who I am, I'm an economist by training. I have 30 years of experience globally, nationally, and here in Vermont on issues related to sustainable economic development, and over the past 10 years specifically to climate change and energy. I have had the privilege of serving both administrations. I believe in the ability to collaborate and cooperate across parties, across sectors, and across regions. So I serve on this Governor's Climate Action Commission. I also served on the Hydropower Working Group Commission as Shumlin, and I was the director of the Energy Siting Policy Commission. I've been the co-chair of the Clean Energy Development Fund Board, so as you can see, these are issues that are near and dear to my heart. What moves me personally is my children and what we're leaving them in terms of moving forward. My day job is as program director for the Energy Action Network, which is over 200 public, private, nonprofit, utility, and educational organizations that cover fuel dealers as well as renewables and efficiency people. So there are a range of people who participate in Energy Action Network's work. The bottom line of what I wanted to say here today is that I fully support the need for a study that the commission recommended, and it was 20 out of 21 commissioners who recommended it. And I think the one person, I'll go into why I think there may be some misunderstanding on the one person, or some of the things that I've heard talked about here today. But it is something that all of us supported because one main reason, and that's that as a legislature, we hope that the decisions that you make are fully informed. Whether you're going to generate a policy or not generate a policy, that needs to be an informed decision. And I think a lot of people come to the table on these issues with a lot of baggage and preconceived notions. And all we're asking for is an independent, nonpartisan evaluation of a range of options. That's the other thing that I'm finding a little confusing in some of the testimony today. It sounds like we're only talking about a carbon tax. I would say, having participated both in the Climate Action Commission, and I might add I'm a member of the Climate Economy Action Team as well, where we've debated this across a wide number of people extensively, that the important thing is not to come to the table saying it's a yay or nay on one proposal for one carbon tax. It's understanding what is out there as mechanisms and models that we can understand costs and benefits, the pros and cons, the administrative costs of what's out there. One of those absolutely is a carbon tax, but also look at, and this is something that I didn't quite understand from the governor's response, we are already part of a regional carbon mechanism. We are part of one of the most successful ones in the history of this country, which is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. We are part of that, and Vermont has been the biggest beneficiary on a per capita basis from that participation. We're already part of that. But part of the difficulty with that particular organization is that it only focuses on the electric sector. And I found a lot of the testimony here today only focusing on the electric sector. Whereas, and I'm happy to share with you some of the materials we have, the electric sector only accounts for 20% of our carbon emissions. The elephants in the room are transportation and heat, which is why the 9 states that are part of the regional existing greenhouse gas initiative, RGGI, want to expand it to transportation. They have a whole working group that's there. That should be part of the study. We need to look at the pros and cons of expanding it to transportation to see what we can do so that Vermont can benefit from a regional program. That's another option that's out there. I'm not saying I'm for one or another. There's a third option, which is the Western Climate Initiative. not Western states, but Western Hemisphere. That means Quebec and California, and now Ontario, are part of what's called the Western Climate Initiative, and it's a cap-and-trade program, much like RGGI. That cap-and-trade program has been enormously successful. And why has it been successful? Because it's brought in $2 billion worth of funds so that can be invested in Quebec alone, $2 billion over the past 3 years, in terms of funds that they are investing in their economy, in their most vulnerable, and in the energy transformation for the future. In California, in the past 3 years, it's been $5 billion. They are inviting us, and I have been in contact with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs there and the Ministry of Environmental Services. I work directly with them, and they would love to have some of you go and visit and understand what that's all about.
Road trip.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Or I'm happy to bring them here to testify in as many people who want to have here. They have a very successful program. Quebec is now the fastest growing economy in all of Canada.
So you said it was, the $2 billion is in Quebec?
Is in Quebec, $5 billion in California. Okay? So those are 3 different options. I'm not saying one is better than another. I'm saying that as informed legislators and policymakers, you need to be sure that you are informed, that we're not coming with our baggage. I know all of us have baggage. I'm not saying any one person or another. On the left and the right, we've got our preconceived notions. Step aside from those preconceived notions and generate policy based on informed decisions. And that's what this study is all about. And I think this is a unique opportunity to be able to invest not only in the future of our economy, but in the most vulnerable. I think if we're going to design a study, we need to understand what is the impact on greenhouse gas emissions. For those of you who don't care about that, let's look at what the impact is going to be on our economy, who are the winners and losers, and then thirdly, look at what the impact is on the most vulnerable and how we can help the most vulnerable. That's what this study should do and should inform you so that you can make a decision, pro or con, on whatever these ones are. That's what it should be. I'm happy to share with you, part of EAN's work is to provide, we have public and private partners who help us. We work with public agencies and transparent information, doing evaluations and tracking of where your policies stand. You know that you have greenhouse gas goals, you know that you have renewable energy goals, you know that you have efficiency goals. What we do every year is we say, what is the statute, what are your targets, and where are you, okay? So we have an annual thing that we check with every single public member of EAN to be sure that everybody's okay with what we're saying, and I'm happy to share this with you, or send it into Christy if that's what you'd like. We also track, together with public agencies, what is the greenhouse gas emissions progress and where we stand on all of that sort of thing. So I'm happy to share with you those transparent, independently analyzed, publicly verified pieces of information to show you where we are and how we need to bend the curve going forward. And to bend the curve going forward, you as legislators need to know and be fully informed as to what your options are. And so I hope that we'll also have the opportunity to discuss this with the governor, because I think that informed policymaking is what everybody would like to have, particularly if you look at the impact on 3 things. Come again, climate goals. We're a climate commission. We're supposed to recommend climate goals, what we have as an impact. Number 2, our economy, which I know every one of you is concerned about. And number 3, ensuring that all Vermonters can benefit from this energy transition. We need to know, how can that happen? That's it for now. I'm happy to answer any questions. Oh, one other thing, sorry. One other thing is that I'm not sure if you're aware, and I'm also happy to share this with you, the study that came out of VEIC, which is called Mapping the Energy Burden. I'm happy to pass these around. This is looking at what the impact of current fossil fuel energy is in Vermont. Okay? What is the impact in terms of the percentage of your income that you spend on energy? And again, I want to reiterate that energy isn't just electricity. Electricity is just a teeny piece of the problem here. It's transportation and heat. Those are the big problems, okay? So what do you spend on energy? That goes up to 25% for some of our poorest Vermonters that they're currently spending on energy. How can we help them move away from that in transportation, in heat, and in electricity, and obviously with efficiency? How can we help them? The burden that you see there, this is Vermont. The red is where the hot spots are. That's where on a share of your average income, your median income, those are the people who have the greatest burden. Part of what we need to know is how whatever revenues we generate from this kind of, from this study, what mechanism we choose to go with. If we choose to go with a mechanism, that's up to you. But if we choose to go with a mechanism, what is the impact on those most vulnerable Vermonters, okay? How can we get them to shift away from an inefficient, regressive situation that they're living in right now to one that is not regressive, but progressive in terms of the amount of energy, the amount of money they're spending on their energy. I would much prefer that they spend it on taking care of their grandparents and taking care of their children than spending it on money that goes outside of this state. So this is a terrific study, yes. So it's an energy burdens, here, I'm not sure if I have enough copies, but I'm also trying to send it in to you.
It needs to be done in color because color coding is part of it. Can we do that?
I can send it downstairs to get it printed, but if you have copies for everybody, that would be great. And if you'll send it to me electronically, that would be good too.
I also will pass around the tracking of your statutes.
We did Reggie under the Douglas administration.
I know.
Which could be a good model for this governor
Well,
to think about.
that's what this study is about. It's studying what are your current options.
You were here earlier when we were told the governor wants no part of this.
Well, but that's what I mean. I genuinely think that that could be a misunderstanding, that we're talking about one thing. We're studying whether a carbon tax is the right thing or isn't. I disagree that we should study a carbon tax. We should study a multitude of mechanisms and understand the pros and cons of each. Understand.
And that's what the language
That's the
says.
point. That's what the language says, and it's really, I mean, I think the language is great that's in there. Why would you say no to informing yourself? Sorry.
I wanted to say something about, well, more specifically about the Essex plan, but I'm going to say it anyway, so you can hear it. Is that the idea of just putting money back on people's electricity bills, I know it's a simple administrative that way, but if people just get it back and then they don't have any incentive about what to do with it, they may not actually save up their money to those credits on their bill, to go to a better heating system or to be able to buy another car. So I was thinking that why not have that credit just be there and be not go directly to the paying of the electric bill, but be held in a savings account and then be used for things that actually will decrease reliance on fossil fuels.
What I think about that kind of thing is that in this study, you ask those kinds of questions, right? And you say, what are the most effective uses of, because every one of the carbon pricing mechanisms that you can look at will generate revenue. Every evaluation of these shows that in a tight budget environment that you guys are all in right now, and if you just saw the news from Massachusetts today, I don't know if you heard about Massachusetts is going with the pipeline, the Hydro-Quebec pipeline going through Massachusetts, and TDI isn't going to come to Vermont. So I'm in the co-chair of the Clean Energy Development Fund Board, which has done awesome things for poor Vermonters all over the state, switching from inefficient wood heat to efficient wood heat, doing a whole bunch of things. That was the money that was being counted on at the CEDF to continue those programs. We're out of luck. If TDI isn't going to happen, we're out of luck. So we need to know what are other revenue generation sources out there.
So do you think that this language, and there's enough language in this draft to do what I just said I was interested in?
I don't know. I'd have to look at it again, but I think that in terms of the RFP or the contract that is done, and I think the Climate Commission has already said we'd be happy to have a number of individuals working on drafting the RFP that goes out. It would need to include, I don't remember if it's included in here sufficiently, but it would definitely need to include that type of thing to say, look, let's look at the least cost, most useful benefit of the revenues that are generated from whatever mechanism is being studied. And you put them side by side. Pros and cons, costs and benefits, utilization of the funds that are generated to invest in our economy and our most vulnerable. And that's an example of the type of thing that could be looked at. And I think you should probably send specifics on that to be sure, anybody around the table, if there's specific questions that you have, that would go into the RFP as a question that the study needs to address. How could the Essex plan do it? How could joining WCI do it? How could expanding RGGI to transportation? Any of those could be potential mechanisms, and there may be other regulatory mechanisms that we're not even aware of that could be included in the study. I think it's a really good point. And I'll just give an example. I'm on my energy committee in my town, and I live in South Burlington, and we finally, after 5 years, got a solar array on our closed landfill. Pretty darn good use of land that can't be used in any other way. Okay, so we have a solar project on the landfill. The savings that are generated for our municipality and our town are $50,000 a year for our city and $50,000 a year for our school. So our school system gets $50,000 a year savings from the get-go. The town didn't have to put a penny down and is getting $50,000 worth of savings. What they have decided to do as a town is to put that savings into a fund that can only be used for increased savings in use of energy, conservation, efficiency, et cetera, et cetera. That was amazing. That was our town manager that did it, Kevin Dorn, who worked for another administration in the past. I'm sure you do. It was great. It was really great thinking. It'll only generate more savings for the town going forward. In this environment of schools, having difficulty in budgets, $50,000 a year is pretty darn good. And that's what we're getting in savings from that. Anyway, just to say that your notion of having money go into something that must be used for continued savings going forward, that's going to help average working Vermonters. I think it's a great idea.
Who'd they choose?
Who choose?
Massachusetts. Who did they choose to deliver?
They choose what's called the Northern, I'm sure.
Northern Pass.
Yes, Northern Pass.
HQ.
Oh my God.
That was this morning. They chose the Northern Pass. So we are out of luck with a lot of money we were counting on as a state.
Yeah, no, I didn't know who they had picked. I knew TDI was not picked, and
It was
that
Northern
means
Pass.
a lot
So it's New Hampshire.
for the Clean Water Fund.
Yeah.
It sure does.
That's $5 million.
Doesn't help
Yeah.
New Hampshire either.
I know.
Yeah, sorry, that's an aside.
No, but it's important in the, that's what, pulling
spent
out
10
in the
years
larger
fighting Northern
context of
Pass.
Vermont and revenue sources, that's an important thing to understand. Because the most important, well, there's two most important things about what this study would do. It's looking at both reduction of greenhouse gases and revenue generation. It's revenue generation. And when I look at what Quebec is doing with that money, it's amazing what they're doing. And we need to make sure that if people are losing out here, we want to make sure that that they have a way to find a future. Peter Bourne is part of Energy Action Network, of Bourne's Energy. Bourne's Energy is a really great example of a fuel dealer, because we don't want to hurt other Vermonters, but we want to ensure that whatever path they're taking forward is moving in a direction that has reduced carbon. He's moving in a direction of using what used to bring propane around to people. They're bringing wood pellets around to people, right? That's a renewable source generated in Vermont. Our forests are a renewable energy source. I want to make sure that people just don't keep talking about wind and solar, which is, yes, an important part. Renewable energy is also wood. So anyway, just want to throw that out there.
Aaron, you had a comment for us.
I just wanted to note, in relation to the testimony, I had missed some of the earlier witnesses this afternoon. If there was focus on electricity, I simply wanted to remind the community that on line 19, page 1, the focus of the study is actually on transportation, heating, cooling, and ventilation. It's not actually on electricity. I just want to make sure the committee understands that this is written to look at at other fuels, not electricity. Now, you could include electricity as well, but the writing was based on. And I'm not saying. I just wanted to just follow up on the point that in terms of the elephant is in the bill.
Right, I was responding to other testimony.
No, I understand. And the reason that electricity isn't in here is because it is subject to the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and there is a renewable energy standard. So there's a lot of, so this would address other issues that are not subject to similar programs.
Carol, you have additional?
spite of what Aaron Adler just said, why did you think electricity should be in the
I think you just need to be as informed as possible, and if it looks like, once the study is underway, that electricity doesn't matter for these reasons,
Well, it's not,
that's
it
fine, then
doesn't
you
matter,
don't.
it's that
But-
we're in an agreement, right?
But there are many,
Reggie is an agreement in terms of energy usage.
electricity usage.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but
Yes, the study could include electricity, but I'm just saying why it isn't in this draft. That doesn't mean it can't be changed.
And so I'm just hearing, why do you think it's a good idea?
I think if you're looking at market-wide solutions, that you need to look at what the impact is going to be together with our I would not say we should step out of Reggie at all. In fact, I would support Reggie's initiative to expand Reggie, but we need to look at what the impact would be on electricity. So a study needs to understand that if we were to choose mechanism A, what would the impact be on electricity? Given that if we stay part of Reggie, if we don't stay part of Reggie, whatever it is, all of that just needs to be, total energy is important because it's all energy, and our renewable portion is part of what we have to measure looking at the greenhouse gas reduction, what's happening to renewable energy.
other questions, comments? Good, thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
And thanks for all the work you're doing. This is hard to listen to all kinds of people giving really differing opinions.
Yep. All right, that completes our witnesses for the day. And we have a few minutes here. I know I said we'd get out of here early, but Aaron, you can join us because I just, oh. Okay. I just want to have a little time for some committee discussion, and I would invite Representative Burke to join us if she chooses, since this is a lot of your idea in terms of what we're doing, we're trying to do here. So where are we, and who is it we need, you think we need to speak with, or in terms of additional witnesses? What kinds of changes would you like to suggest that we make in the language? I know Carol wants electricity added, but you know, stuff like that.
Can I make one additional point about
Yes.
electricity? Just that the direction at the beginning of the bill is to look at various approaches to reducing emissions in various sectors, and that's where electricity is not present. The RGGI itself is present in the bill.
Right, yeah. In
The
section 2.
expanding RGGI, and also implicitly, if there were going to be negative impacts on the electric industry in Vermont, you know, it looks like the costs and benefits for Vermont. I'm not saying you shouldn't have electricity, I just want to clarify what's in the draft.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Well, I was just thinking, maybe this wording, or maybe we leave it implicit, but looking at the total energy picture and the impact of changes in transportation, heating, cooling, and ventilation, on electric use, or on what's happening in the electric sector, or something like that.
Well, what was suggested, and I don't know whether it's easier or harder, is a holistic view of energy usage in Vermont that would sweep in electricity. Sure. Maybe not in that introductory part, but at some point.
Yeah. That's what I mean.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And the other thing I wanted to say, when it, the subsection 7 on 3 and 4, on page 3 of 4, something there, I sort of feel uncomfortable. If it said, evaluate methods to provide assistance to mitigate effects on Vermonters with low income, and consider where revenue raised or is saved to move forward in a way that further, reduces carbon emission. In other words,
Just maybe you want to take out the impacts on low income?
no, but in addition.
Oh.
Maybe it's too much detail to put in here. I'm very concerned about who's paying, who gets back credits, who gets incentives. That's very important to me, that whole thing.
So, and you do not feel that the language is strong enough or directive enough?
It's too narrow. It just talks about effects on Vermonters with low income, and I think that it might be, when I looked at the Essex plan, it looked like there's low income help, and it looked like there's help for people under 75,000, but only if they live in certain places. I just want a more general, what could you do to help people, not just low income. It's going to be helping people at all income levels to incentivize them to do different things.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. The question is, do you understand what you're saying, and can you capture it?
Well, can we discuss that?
Yeah, maybe you don't all agree with me. It's fine with me if you don't. That's my idea. I'm just throwing it up.
I guess, maybe I don't understand, but this isn't to tell what we're gonna do with money. This is only a study. Isn't that what this study is supposed to do, is come up with the ideas and solutions and
Well, but
how to mitigate all the...
you gotta know what the impact is. I mean, that's part of being fully informed, and with that, both pro and con witnesses to the bill say that it is important for the legislature to be fully informed. So, I'll take them at their word. And I'm sorry, what?
No, just that I do have a particular concern for low-income people, that it doesn't have a really negative impact. And they we know from Tropical Storm Irene that, the impacts on them are huge when climate stuff comes our way, with, trailer parks being flooded out, and, they seem to live in more vulnerable areas. So I guess I'm just not, I feel like, higher income people can kind of figure it out for themselves, and but I do want to know very specifically the impact on low income people and make sure that we're not really harming them.
Well, I didn't hear that wouldn't be part of it. I just heard broader.
Yeah, but it basically just means then the impact on everybody, and I very specifically would like to see the impact on low income people.
But
Well, if you're gonna say low income, you gotta say elderly also.
Yeah, but isn't that what number 7 says? On page 3, it says the study shall evaluate methods to provide assistance to mitigate effects on Vermonters with low income.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that.
I'm really concerned about the people who live in rural areas with no public transportation. I mean, I drive 40 miles to work, round trip, 5 days a week. Carbon tax on gasoline, going to take an awful big chunk out of the money I earn every week. And I know that's the really bulging concern in my district, is people are worried that, that they're going to be poor. And secondly, this is another attempt to just push people into growth centers and to make sure that they live within where you wouldn't have to spend that kind of money to go to work. Or you would have a public transportation would pick everybody up at Jake's place and
societal engineering.
Exactly, and it's very disturbing for us who choose to live in Vermont to be put into that kind of a situation. A lot of us like to live out of town. I mean, we came to Vermont to live out of town. We like the town's connection, but we don't want, basically, like rural living. And I don't, unless there's some kind of, you start to look at the impact of what it's going to have on rural people where there's hardly any public transportation. I know I won't vote for this.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Jim, you were part of
Yeah,
the
Jim,
vote.
and then Mary, and then Trevor. She's been.
So we are still on number 7, and It absolutely needs to be more inclusive. It has to include rural, and so it says effects on Vermonters or low-income Vermonters and rural Vermonters.
I'd be happy with that.
Yeah,
And there's no reason that you can't have an 8. I mean,
Yeah.
rural and low income,
right.
not all that
That's
we're
right.
interested in. There's no reason that you can't have an 8. I mean,
Yeah.
rural and low income,
Right.
not all that
That's
we're
right.
interested in. Small business, I certainly want to know, and I know that there's a whole committee that's going to want to know
Yeah.
what the impacts would be.
But I think the whole focus of this is what's the impact on our economy, and that would
That's true.
what I want to say, without science, I mean, I really do not want to sound high and mighty here, but I pay the impacts of other people driving huge amounts. I choose to drive very little because I'm aware of my greenhouse gas emissions and the asthma rates and things like that. And I think people, I'm okay with having, that people can have to, rather than, socializing all of the costs for their choices of wanting to do things, that there is something that you have to pay for, that, it does, make our air dirtier, it does have an impact on our health. And we've been socializing those costs forever.
No, I would just want to talk to the rural piece like we just chatted about.
I would like also to have middle income people considered here. Lower income, middle income, and rural.
Yeah, I agree with the chairman. I don't think I want to see poor couples rural.
No, I'm not.
I mean, I think they stand alone.
Yes, I think I would have a whole other, 8 and 9. It's fine.
Yeah, no, that's what I said.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
can do it as an
I'm
8.
also interested in 9, which is middle income, because middle income people, we talk about benefits. Well, I'm concerned about benefits splits and stuff, and what middle income people are, there's a lot of burden on middle income.
Let me ask the economist. Is there a phrase that can capture all of the incomes in terms of impact, so that
Yeah, I'm sure Aaron has, he's done this a ton of times. So yeah, it would just be the distributional impact. All you have to say is the distributional impact. And any study that's worth their salt will understand what the distributional impact would be. So what's the impact on high income, median income, low income, and I think adding rural is important. We're a rural state because that's sort of the exception that that needs to be looked at. We need to look at the impact there. But if you say distributional impact, you could say with particular emphasis on low income or whatever, however you want. But distributional impact, and Aaron, I'm sure you've got 40 that you've got.
You could say distributional impact by income and location.
And
I mean, in other
location.
words,
There you go.
so it could be all in 7.
as you were
Hold that
saying.
thought. I'm saying hold that thought.
But can I add one more thing? I do want to just make sure the committee is aware that you're going back to page 2, lines 11 and 13, got impact on economic development, innovation, and job creation in the state, and effect on the cost of living in Vermont. So that's looking at costs and benefits. I'm sorry. Generally, the low-income piece was actually providing assistance to mitigate effects, to look at different ways that one can do it. Maybe you want, I understand you may want to broaden that. There was, the study would, as written, look at all incomes. This focus on 7 was, okay, well, assuming that given that some of these possibilities are regressive, what would be the different ways of providing assistance to particularly vulnerable people at the bottom of the income scale? I'm not saying you shouldn't change it, I just wanted to clarify this.
I think the other thing we need to remember, whether we live in an urban area or a very rural area, is that we have some semblance of control over our electricity, especially our in-state electricity. You know, there's rate setting at the Public Utility Commission. We have absolutely no control whatsoever over fossil fuels that are imported into the state, where 80 cents of every dollar goes out of the state. And that's going to be extremely harmful to rural people if gas prices just go to $4 a gallon, which they've done before.
Back up to, yeah.
Back up to, right.
I have a sheet that shows the last 20 years of prices, if you'd like to look, comparing all of those. I'm sure that.
I mean, I know where I worked at the time at Burlington Electric Department. There were a lot of people coming in from very rural areas who started carpooling. Some started taking the bus. They made changes that actually a lot of them stuck with after because they realized how much money they were saving.
Yes.
I need the language. I need it, because I represent a lot of people who, you know, both parents are working, or, you know, they can't necessarily figure stuff out. They don't have time to figure out what they're gonna do, and then they're paying. And I want to be sure that they're included in a mitigation of effects. I also represent loan.
I just have a quick question for the economist. What do you think of the $100,000 fee for a study? Think it's low? You never get much out of it, $100,000. Any questions?
I actually think that there's a fair number of materials out there. We already have a study that was done for Vermont, the total energy study, RAP study. It doesn't go far enough. It doesn't look at enough options in my view. But there's also studies out there of RGGI. There's a lot of work being done on RGGI and Western Climate Initiative. It's California, the 7th largest economy in the world, and Quebec, our northern neighbor with whom we want to have a lot of interaction. They've done a lot of evaluations. And so I think a study, 100,000, could be done. I do, because I think there's a lot of evaluation already out there. The key that we want to find out is what is the impact on Vermont.
Do you think that 100,000 figure is high?
I think it is. Yeah.
So that's sort of building on a question this morning of mine about study or research. So using everybody else's studies and pulling a paper together that answers the questions that we need to ask. And JFO responded to that yeah, but, you know,
They still would, I understand their interest, they would still have to do quality control.
Yeah.
You know.
And we're asking to do it quickly, so that means that not necessarily people, I mean, I'm willing to listen to what they're saying they need, and we can allocate up to that amount, and then if they don't, we draw it down, that's fine.
Well, some of the criticism we've heard today has been on, it's a very complicated process. And doubts have been raised as to whether we can do it in the time frame we projected here, and now, I don't know, I'm still not, I'm hearing at least one source say we can do a good job on 100,000, but I don't know, I'm looking at my notes and I'm just thinking, God, there's just seems to be a lot of questions that might have to go.
I think the Remy report, was that like 75,000 or was it?
Yeah. So that's the total energy study that I was referring to, and they, there's the Remy report and the total energy study, which were only done, what, 3 years ago? 2 years ago?
Yeah, 2014.
So that's a lot of information that was already very Vermont specific. I mean, that was paid for by the department, if I remember right. And so it would be updating that information and adding the new stuff that's coming out of RGGI and the new stuff that we know about the Western Climate Initiative, which covers all 3 sectors. Western Climate Initiative covers electricity, heat, and transportation. And there's a lot of new information coming out of that. and that's, again, Quebec and California. So I think anybody who's, and we've got, I mean, Remy Study had good consultants, we have RAP here, there's others in New England, and obviously you guys have to decide who's an independent source. It should be an independent source. But with Joint Fiscal Office overseeing it, I don't think Joint Fiscal Office is capable of doing it on their own. That was, I don't know if that was a discussion.
What is the Vermont Energy Investment Corporation?
That's efficiency.
That's-
In Vermont, it operates Efficiency Vermont.
Okay. Good. Because Beedberg, Energy Investment and social businesses for social responsibility paid for and was prepared for Beedberg. So you shake your head no, and I want to go look at the cover page.
I guess I haven't seen, the Remy study that is being referred to as, this was the one for the Commission for a Carbon Tax specifically?
Yes.
Or the-
Carbon price policy.
But the one by the department?
No, he's looking
No.
at Vermont, that's why
I'm looking at
I think
the
the one
Vermont.
commissioned
Yeah.
by the department, which was the
Yeah.
total energy study. We've got the department here.
The Department of Public Service did a total energy study that's different from what you're looking at.
Yeah, no, this is just one that someone reacted to, and I just wanted to check it out.
Could I just say something? That man from Rutland, I mean, I was the one who said something about BED and the incentives for the heat pump. I just emailed the head of energy efficiency, energy services at Burlington Electric Department, and his response was BED and EBT offer the same upstream incentive, 600 or 800, depending on size, to HVAC contractors at the point of purchase of these heat pumps. The contractor gets a discounted price from their supplier, and then the supplier bills EBT or BED. So I have no idea where he got this idea that there was, BED was thinking that EBT was charging so much, or.
No, it was the energy savings was inflated.
Yeah, but that's really calculated by the Public Utility Commission. I mean, you can't just decide what the savings is at that level.
I understand that. He was just arguing that there was a difference. All testimony, since it is not sworn and not cross-examined, is what it's worth.
Well, I just wanted to get that
Yep,
out.
no, that's fine, that's fine. Your head hurts? Okay, time to go. So we'll try doing those modifications around 7 or 8 in terms of the concern about broad economic as well as low income, rural, and other concerns. Try some language for the next iteration, and that's what we'll use for the next time the committee takes this up. And I don't know when it is, but I believe now. Here I'm going to ask the committee to hold on, guys. Trust me on a procedural thing that I would like to do. I would like the committee to vote the bill out as is. It will hit the floor on Tuesday. I will stand and make a motion that it be committed to this committee. That way it has a number, it's posted. Right now it's a draft, other than what posting it on our site. People can't track the bill the way they can all the other bills, okay? So this is I'm asking you to do a procedural vote to get it out, and then we'll get it back in here on Tuesday.
A recorded vote?
Yes. Yeah.
We've done.
And because I want to record the motion for the purposes of getting a number assigned to the bill. So that's the motion I'm looking for. I'm sorry, someone had their hand up. Second. Mom?
Well, you're in the middle of it. I just wanted to say something, but I don't have to say it right now.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Oh, okay, I just want to thank.
He's got to write this down, so.
I just wanted to thank the committee for taking this up, and I just wanted to remind everybody that really what we're talking about is a study, investigation, and you know, there's lots that happens between that and, taking any action. So I just think we need to know what's out there. What are the economic advantages? Are there any? So I think it's, just wanted to stress that.
So, Carol's made the motion to vote the bill out for the purposes of getting it assigned a number. Do I have a second?
You got it.
Okay, Paul beat you. He got his hand up first.
Paul's just.
My birthday. Yeah, it's his birthday present, yeah. Any discussion? Hearing none. Clerk will. Thank you.
Representative Spurley, yes. Representative Odie?
Yes.
Representative McCullough?
Yes.
Representative Lefebvre?
Yes?
Representative Dayer?
Yep.
Representative Sullivan?
Yes.
Representative Dean?
Yes.
Do you know how hard that is for me to vote yes? You've heard my voting.
Yeah, no, the last week, you've been Mr. Negativity.
You're gonna get in trouble.
Yeah.
You're gonna get in trouble.
I don't necessarily.
I have to show the committee my birthday
disagree
card.
with all this stuff, but the principle I
I don't think I wore it, I don't want to wear it on the floor, I might get sexual harassment.
Yeah, right. It's one of those things,
Yeah.
you're not in